Corvallis, Oregon, Monday, May 24th, 2004, 8:30 a.m. Oregon State University student Randy Honrud is walking through Reser Stadium parking lot on her way to class.
She happened to notice a green van driving around her, and next thing you know, it pulled up next to her, and a man jumped out asking for directions.
Randy doesn't get a good feeling about this guy. He opens the side door. She sees boxes and blankets in there, and she immediately excused herself, said, I'm late for class.
Randy rushes off toward campus. The driver gets back in the green van and exits the lot.
Crystal Thornton, a short distance away, is also approached by the same 1997 green Dodge Caravan. The man gets out of the van. He's got an out-of-state map. He's asking for directions. She doesn't feel comfortable.
One of the school athletic directors pulls up, notices the strange interaction going on. He comes over, intercedes. The van driver got spooked. He jumped in his car, and he took off.
10 a.m. 1 block away from Reser Stadium, 19-year-old Brooke Wilberger, who's back home after completing her freshman year at Brigham Young, is working a summer job at the Oak Park Apartments, which her sister manages.
Her sister Stephanie sees her with a bucket full of water and a mop, and she's ready to go out and clean some light post.
A green Dodge van pulls up beside her. It basically obscures her view from people in apartments nearby.
The driver comes out with some sort of a shipping envelope in his hand and starts asking directions of Brooke.
Suddenly, the man pulls a knife, forces Brooke into the van, and speeds away.
He stops about 5 minutes down the road and then binds her with duct tape and then drives toward the wilderness.
A few hours go by. Stephanie hasn't seen her sister Brooke for a while, so she looks around. She sees the bucket and the mop, but even more strangely, she notices Brooke's flip-flops on the ground.
One of the flip-flops' toe strap is literally broken out. Stephanie immediately gets the feeling that something bad has happened. Her husband, Zach, at about 3 p.m., calls 911.
911, what's your emergency?
Yeah, I've got someone who's missing, a worker of mine that we can't seem to find. She was doing some outside work. Her stuff is there and her shoes are there, but she's been missing now for a while. We've called everyone and no one has seen her.
The police immediately send the detectives over there, and they immediately begin a missing persons report on 19-year-old Brooke Wilberger.
Brooke's purse, wallet, phone, and car remain at the apartment complex. It seems clear to investigators that Wilberger, who's not the type to wander off without telling anyone, did not leave of her own volition.
Brooke Wilberger is the fifth of 6 children of Cammie and Greg Wilberger. They're a Mormon family. Brooke is described as scrappy and tough, and she's a bubbly, vivacious girl.
Brooke was a popular young woman, an excellent student. She had lots of friends.
Police start their investigation with Brooke's inner circle.
One of the first people looked into was Brooke's boyfriend, Justin. He was pretty quickly ruled out, though, since he was 4,000 miles away in South America on his Mormon mission. The next step was to contact Brooke's family. Before long, every family member was, in fact, eliminated as a suspect in her disappearance. Brooke's family was well known in Corvallis, and as soon as the word got out that she was missing, people got to work.
Hundreds of volunteers start swarming the area. 4,000 flyers are put up about the disappearance of Brooke, giving her physical description.
Billboards were put up on major intersections. A website was established, an 800 number.
The local Mormon church helps organize a massive search effort.
Corvallis is nearby to some very remote wilderness areas, so it's difficult terrain. People are searching literally 4,000 acres of a heavily wooded area.
At the 11-day point, just about every nook and cranny in the general Corvallis area had been searched. At that point, the search was officially called off. However, the investigation continued.
You have a suspect that apparently abducted a girl in broad daylight. Very, very rare occurrence. This type of behavior shows that this criminal probably has tried to do this before or have successfully done this before. The police start going through this pool of suspects, the sex offenders, people with any kind of history of sexual crimes.
They realized there were many of them, upwards of several thousand, actually, and they had to go out and interview every single person.
One of the first people contacted is 45-year-old ex-con Lauren Hugo Kruger. He'd been convicted in 1985 of attempted rape and served time for the felony assault and attempted kidnapping of a 23-year-old jogger. Kruger had also been questioned in multiple stalking incidents in 2003.
On the day of Brooke's disappearance, Kruger happened to be observed in a car dealership only about a half a mile away from the point of Brooke's abduction. But when all the facts are put together, the investigators could eliminate him as one of their suspects.
Before long, 30-year-old Washington State University graduate Sung-Koo Kim emerges as a person of interest.
Kim is unemployed. He lives in the area.
He was someone known from just a month before at the universities, breaking into various places, dormitories, laundries, and stealing women's underwear.
Tigard, Oregon, Saturday, May 29, 2004. Detectives execute a search warrant on Kim's residence, where he still lives with his parents.
He's got over 3,000 pairs of women's underwear. He has a collection of used tampons, a collection of pubic hairs, and he literally has hundreds of these things cataloged with a time, description of the person he got it from.
It appears from Kim's logs that some of the stolen items came from Oregon State's dorms, as well as the laundry room at the Oak Park Apartments, where Brooke Wilberger was last seen. Cops search his computer and find a massive cache of pornography with more than 40,000 graphic videos and photos of sexual mutilation and murder. There's also a document that reads like a how-to guide for committing a sex crime. The media dubs Kim the panty thief. He looks like a viable suspect in the Wilberger case, but passes a polygraph and appears to have an ironclad alibi.
When all the facts were put together, despite this person's unusual predilections, he could be ruled out as having been involved in the disappearance of Brooke.
By October 2004, 5 months into the investigation, police have a third strong suspect, Aaron James Evans. Evans had been arrested for attacking a female Oregon State student on September 29th, just a couple blocks away from where Brooke Wilberger vanished. But Evans has an alibi for May 24th and is eventually eliminated from suspicion. In May 2004, police in Corvallis, Oregon are investigating the missing persons case of Brooke Wilberger.
There's one piece of evidence that is kind of nagging them. That's a green Dodge Caravan. The police are notified of 3 distinct incidents that day. Brooke disappeared.
The best they had was a call from someone named Brian, no last name, who said he believed a green van was driving around that area where Brooke was last seen, acting suspiciously.
Unfortunately, the police are not able to find this Brian and interview him further. The other 2 people are the 2 girls that were at Oregon State University, Crystal and Randy.
Just minutes apart, both OSU students had been spooked near Reeser Stadium by the driver of a green van. In Crystal's case, one of the school's athletic directors stepped in and chased the driver off. The AD informs police that the mysterious green van has a Minnesota license plate. Albuquerque, New Mexico, Monday, November 29th, 2004, 5:30 p.m. A 22-year-old Russian exchange student who goes by the pseudonym Natalie Kirov leaves the daycare center on the University of New Mexico campus where she works. She makes a pit stop at the duck pond, then walks home down Harvard Drive.
She's grabbed from behind by a wild-eyed, crazy-looking guy with a knife in his hand. He then forces her into his red car.
He then climbs over her to the driver's seat and closes and locks the passenger door and holds her at knife point in the car as he drives off.
He pulled over near Princeton and he started touching me.
He makes her take off her clothes and sexually assaults her.
The kidnapper stops at a rundown apartment complex to buy crack. He ties up Natalie with her own shoelaces and goes inside.
While he's in the building, she's able to free her hands.
I figured out how I can unlock the door, so I just ran away.
A woman named Dara Fink is driving by, and her daughter is in the car with her, and they happen to see Natalie running through the street, mostly naked, and she agrees to help Natalie. They immediately call 911, describe the incident, describe the individual. She explains to the police what his car was like, this red 2-door Honda.
Police rush to the apartment complex where Natalie escaped.
They're able to find a woman who says, yeah, there was a guy here named Joe, and she says she thinks she knows where this guy Joe lives.
The Albuquerque police proceed to the location where this person, Joe, is supposed to live. Sure enough, they see the red Honda.
As they're examining the car, a man approaches them. They ask if his name is Joe, and he says, no, it's Joel. And he tells them, yeah, this is my car.
The officers search Joel. They find a crack pipe and a knife on his person.
They slap the bracelets on him and take him in.
Joel Patrick Courtney is a 38-year-old mechanic, fisherman, who lives with his wife, Rosie, and their 3 children. Joel and Rosie had what could be described as a rocky relationship. In fact, only a few weeks before, Rosie filed a protection order against her husband.
Joel is a man that's always in and out of trouble. He's got a problem with drugs.
Courtney's drug problems can be traced back to Beaverton, Oregon, where his childhood started out relatively uneventful.
He was one of 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls, and he experienced parents who cared about him. They were, by all accounts, a normal family, but it didn't last long for Joel.
As young as 11 years of age, Joel starts experimenting with drugs.
As young as 14 years old, he's molesting his sister, and his cousin is molested by him repeatedly over the next several years.
By 19, Joel Courtney is not only a drug addict, he starts to embrace Satanism and commit sexual assaults.
What happened in 1984 is he's at a party one night with a girl, and he leaves the party.
They were driving home together, and when he made a sexual advancement and she pushed back, he punched her, and he began grabbing her in places he shouldn't have.
So she drops him off at home, immediately goes to the authorities, explains what happens. Joel's arrested for assaulting this girl.
And that was the first time Joel was in the system for this type of crime.
Fast forward to December 2004. Joel Courtney is back in front of law enforcement for the attack on Natalie Kirov. Detectives wonder if Courtney's capable of sexual assaults 20 years apart. Has he victimized any other women who've crossed his path? In late November 2004, 6 months after 19-year-old Brooke Wilberger vanishes in Corvallis, Oregon.
On December 7th, Detective Jinx Jones of the Albuquerque PD realized the person he had in custody, Joel Courtney, had a connection going back to Oregon. He contacted the Oregon law enforcement authorities and asked them, has anyone been abducted, kidnapped, missing, raped?
Right away, the disappearance of Brooke Wilberger comes up. The investigators say, yeah, we got this open case, unsolved.
The Wilberger task force soon learns that during 2004, Joel Courtney moved around a lot, trying to reconcile his volatile relationship with wife Rosie.
Rosie tries to leave him at one point. She moves away from him, and he follows her. They end up living in Portland, Oregon, living with relatives. And while they're there, it just happens to be the time period when Brooke disappears.
In fact, 3 weeks before Wilberger went missing, Courtney had been hired by a janitorial services company that operates in Corvallis.
He had a van, a green Dodge Caravan that belonged to the company, had Minnesota plates, and he drove this van when he was in Oregon.
Courtney's van is the exact green van law enforcement has been trying to locate for nearly 7 months.
Ever so slowly, Joel Courtney is becoming the prime suspect in the disappearance of Brooke.
Now, with the connection to Courtney, the task force tracks down the green van.
They bring it down to the FBI office in Oregon, where they disassemble it. The FBI removes the carpeting, the seats, and everything else that might have DNA evidence or other kinds of trace evidence. They send it back to the FBI laboratory at Quantico, Virginia.
In February of 2005, the Brooke Wilberger task force travels to Albuquerque, New Mexico, with search warrant in hand. They need DNA from Joel Courtney.
Joel pulls out some of his own pubic hair to give to them, and now they have a physical specimen to compare against bodily fluids that they find in the van.
While they wait for the lab results, police attempt to place Joel Courtney in Corvallis on May 24th, the day Brooke vanished. Coincidentally, he was due in court that day to face a DUI charge. Courtney apparently made a call from Corvallis saying he would be late, but never showed up.
Family members told the police on May 25th, the day after Brooke disappeared, Joel had already been gone for about 16 hours overnight. He finally shows up, and he's a mess. He's disheveled. He's saying that he somehow was forced to go into the woods. There's these men there. There's blood. There's a young girl who's somehow being held captive. He's creating this whole scenario as if he was compelled to go somewhere and do something he didn't want to do.
At the time, no one in Joel's family believes his story. They chalk it up to his chronic drug use.
On May 24th, 2005, exactly 1 year to the day of the abduction of Brooke Wilberger, the task force in Oregon received a call from the FBI laboratory.
It is conclusively Joel Courtney's and Brooke's DNA that are found together in the van.
Now there was no doubt. She was in that van. She was put there by Joel Courtney, and most likely he knows where she is right now.
The commingled DNA indicates that Brooke had been sexually assaulted, so Joel Courtney is charged with rape in addition to kidnapping and murder.
On August 2nd, 2005, the Albuquerque investigators serve an arrest warrant on Joel. Now he knows he has to come back and face charges in Oregon.
So he starts acting like he's mentally unstable, thinking that that would somehow provide a defense for him.
Despite the way he had been acting, the New Mexico courts decided that Joel Courtney was in fact competent to stand trial.
In 2007, Courtney pleads guilty in a New Mexico court to the kidnapping and sexual assault of Russian exchange student Natalie Kirov. The judge sentences Courtney to 18 years in prison.
Joe Courtney would never get too comfortable in a New Mexico prison. In April of 2008, he was extradited to Oregon to face charges on the murder of Brooke Wilberger.
In the spring of 2009, 42-year-old convicted rapist Joel Patrick Courtney stands trial in a Benton County, Oregon court for the kidnapping, rape, and murder of Brooke Wilberger. Prosecutors introduce evidence to show that Courtney has a history of violence and sexual assaults against women dating back more than 2 decades. They also present a witness who spent time with Joel the night before Brooke's abduction.
This individual stated that they used to work together, and that night and well until the morning, they were drinking and doing crack. So obviously, Joel Courtney was in a bad state of mind by the time he crossed paths with Brooke Wilberger.
So they have enough evidence that connects him to the victim, but they don't have the victim. They want the victim.
The family members of Brooke were all but begging the prosecutors and even the defense attorneys, offer this guy some kind of a deal, whatever it takes, have him tell us where our daughter is.
The DA does offer Courtney a plea deal.
He has to give them the remains. He has to tell them where her body is, help them find it, and he has to plead guilty.
Under the terms of the agreement, Courtney would receive life in prison without parole, but he rejects the initial offer. Before long, he comes back to the negotiating table and offers to plead guilty if he can be incarcerated in New Mexico near his family instead of Oregon.
Governor Richardson is not happy about having this far-from-model prisoner in the New Mexico prison system for life, so he's completely against this. Eventually, Brooke's family is able to appeal to the governor's office. Upon this appeal, the governor changes his mind and accepts having Joel Courtney be transferred to a facility in New Mexico.
On September 18, 2009, Joel Patrick Courtney signs the plea deal, draws a map to where he dumped Wilberger's remains, and walks law enforcement through how he raped and killed Brooke.
He tells this story, which is probably only partially true. He explains abducting her, forcing her into the van. They camped out. He got some dinner at McDonald's and a bottle of wine. And then in the morning, he raped her.
According to Courtney, Brooke was enraged following the sexual assault. In response, he punched her, then pummeled her to death with a nearby piece of wood.
Based on the now confession from Joel Courtney and with map in hand, the investigators drive about 10 miles from Corvallis into an area known as the Coast Range, attempting to find Brooke's remains.
The police search in the vicinity he gave them. They're at first not able to find the body.
Finally, at 9:40 a.m., investigators discover the remains of Brooke Wilberger.
Her family is now able to lay Brooke's remains to rest, so there's some closure for the family.
Finally, on September 21st, 2009, in a courtroom in Marion County, Joel Courtney was formally sentenced for the murder of Brooke Wilberger. It was life without the possibility of parole.
In my opinion, there's no punishment that could ever equal the crimes that Joel Courtney has committed.
Tampa, Florida, Wednesday, March 28, 1984. 21-year-old prostitute Artis Wick stands on a dark street corner. A man pulls up in a car and invites her to get inside.
The man picks her up with intentions of having sex, but ends up raping her. Unsatisfied from the rape, he strangles her and leaves her for dead.
Artis Wick's body will not be found for 8 months, so the city of Tampa has no idea there's a vicious killer on the loose. North Nebraska Avenue, Thursday, May 10th, 1984, 11:30 p.m. 20-year-old exotic dancer Lana Long finishes her shift at a popular gentleman's club, then starts walking down the street. The area is known for prostitution and strip clubs.
She is walking alone, and she is offered a ride. She accepts the ride.
While driving to a nearby bar, the man pulls off on the side of the road and produces a knife. Lana begins to struggle with him, and he ties her up, rapes her, and strangles her.
72 hours later, on Mother's Day, 2 young boys playing in a field make a sickening discovery: Lana Long's decomposed body.
The police are going to find Miss Long face down. Her hands are behind her back bound, and they find a ligature knot around her neck.
It's obvious to the police that she's been strangled to death. They also note that her legs are spread approximately 5 feet 1 inch apart from heel to heel. Police are left really confounded by who could have possibly committed such a vicious crime.
But the killer leaves behind 2 key pieces of evidence.
During their crime scene investigation, police note carpet fibers on Lana's legs, as well as tire tracks nearby. Those items are collected and sent to the FBI laboratory for further analysis.
Law enforcement treats Lana Long's murder as an isolated incident, but her killer is already on the hunt for another victim. Kennedy Boulevard, Saturday, May 26, 1984, 10:03 p.m. Michelle Sims, a 22-year-old former beauty queen, walks the asphalt, turning tricks to support her cocaine habit.
Michelle encounters a stranger while walking along Kennedy Boulevard.
The man offers Michelle $50 to get into his car. She accepts, and the two drive off. A mile down the road, the driver pulls over and threatens Sims with a knife. He then ties her hands behind her back and drives to a more desolate location.
The man violently rapes Michelle and begins to hit her on the head with a club.
She is strangled and he cuts her throat as well. So we're looking at a slow escalation in the level of violence.
Michelle's body is found the next day, May 27, 1984. In a secluded Lover's Lane area, her body is found laying out. She has ligatures around her neck, and her clothes are hanging in a nearby tree.
The ropes that are used in the strangulation are all cut from the same length. We're looking at a little more planned out than just a random, sporadic, see a girl, take her down, kill her, rape her, and I'm out. This is more pre-planned.
As detectives process the crime scene, they find hair fibers belonging to a Caucasian male and fresh tire tracks in the sand.
It's a 360-degree roll. That gives us a very distinct tread pattern. They find out that it is, in fact, consistent with the tread pattern from the previous murder. In addition, they find more red carpet fibers, and these are identical to the carpet fibers which are found at the other scene.
And now we have an unknown killer on the loose in the area. This causes tensions to rise, especially among the female population.
Tampa, Florida, Friday, June 8, 1984, 7 p.m. Elizabeth Loudenbach, a shy 22-year-old who works on an assembly line, leaves the mobile park where she lives to take a walk. A friendly stranger pulls up and offers her a ride. Once she gets in, the driver pulls a knife.
The assailant then takes her to a nearby orange grove where he attacks her, ties her up, and brutally rapes her. Moments later, she's strangled.
2 weeks later, on June 24th, a citrus worker finds Elizabeth Loudenbach. Her body is so badly decomposed, it only weighs 25 pounds, including clothes.
The police are going to be kind of thrown by this one due to the fact that even though her body's decomposed, it's fully clothed, she's not bound. We're looking at an MO which is dissimilar to the previous murders.
She's not a drug user or a prostitute, as was found in the other cases.
Unlike the others, her ATM card was taken from her and subsequently used at various banks.
Police were not sure if this particular murder was related to the others.
Police question Loudenbach's boyfriend. After he fails a polygraph, he becomes the prime suspect. Until September 1984, when the crime lab reports back its analysis on Elizabeth's clothes.
They do find red fibers, which are similar to the red fibers which are found at the previous sites. So what you're definitely looking at is an established serial killer pattern, which is emerging. And when you've got 3 bodies, there are probably going to be more.
Hillsborough Avenue, Sunday, September 30th, 1984, 11:30 p.m. 18-year-old Chanel Williams is on the street hooking. She's walking toward a nearby hotel to check on a fellow prostitute when a mustached man picks her up in his car. They drive east before pulling over by the entrance of a cattle ranch.
This man proceeds to rape her. When he's finished raping her, he strangles her. But because of her resistance, he reaches for his gun and shoots Chanel in the head.
Chanel's decomposing body is found a week later, face down underneath a fence.
She's African American, which is slightly different from the others. The other interesting, unique characteristic about this murder is the fact that she is found shot, not strangled or cut.
After evidence collected during the crime scene investigation was analyzed, it was determined that she had red carpet fibers on her legs. This connects her to the other unsolved murders.
Tampa, Florida, Sunday, October 14th, 1984, 1:30 a.m. Karen Dinsfriend, A 26-year-old prostitute and cocaine user works her usual street corner.
Karen Din's friend is approached by a man who wants to exchange money for sex.
The man takes Karen to an isolated area, binds her wrists with a bandana, beats and rapes her, then strangles her to death.
1 week after finding Chanel Williams' body, investigators locate the body of Karen Din's friends. And when it is found, what links this particular case to the others is the fact that red carpet fibers were found on her legs. As the body count continues to rise, police are no closer to finding the killer.
In the spring of 1984, a suspected serial killer lays siege to Tampa, Florida, targeting women within the city's red light district.
A task force is going to be formed to catch this serial killer because the women are being killed in a similar manner. You have a background of the victims which is similar, so police are going to concentrate a lot of their focus on the prostitution strips which are prevalent in the Tampa area.
The Homicide Division of the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Department works 24/7 on the case, even assigning undercover female detectives to walk the killer's hunting grounds. But he slips away and kills again.
Halloween 1984, police come across the mummified remains of a young woman in a ditch.
The body belongs to 22-year-old prostitute Kimberly Hops, but they won't identify her for weeks. It appears to CSI as though Hops had been dead for nearly a month and likely died from being strangled with the black cloth choker she wore around her neck.
She has been raped, she has been strangled very violently, and we have, again, the same red fibers found at the scene.
6 months, 6 bodies, each connected by red fibers found at the crime scenes. Yet police don't seem any closer to identifying a suspect. But the killer is about to slip up. Tampa, Florida, Saturday, November 3rd, 1984, 2:30 a.m. 17-year-old Lisa McVeigh finishes a double shift at the local Krispy Kreme. She hops on her bike and travels down a deserted yet familiar road.
Suddenly, she's plucked from her bicycle, and as she begins to fight, she feels a gun being placed against her head.
She is blindfolded, thrown into a car, and she is subsequently kicking and screaming for help.
She desperately tries to look out from under her blindfold, and she's able to locate a knife between the seats in the car. She's ordered to perform a sex act. She is then tied up and driven away from the area.
She's being driven around. Even though she's blindfolded, she's able to make out other vehicles. She can notice the word Magnum on the dash. She sees red carpet in the vehicle itself.
They drive around for a while. Then, the kidnapper stops the car.
She's then taken out of the car blindfolded to what she believes is the attacker's apartment. During the next 26 hours, she's brutally raped while being held hostage inside this apartment.
At one point, Lisa's abductor removes her blindfold. She catches a glimpse of his face.
She tries to gain as much information about location as she can.
Throughout the entire ordeal, she's able to keep a level head and placate her attacker to the point where it seems like he's almost taking a liking to her.
At one point, he takes a shower with her. He washes her hair in a manner that she later describes as being almost as if she were his girlfriend.
3 a.m. the next day, Lisa's attacker tells her to get dressed. And to her shock, he takes her out to his car and tells her he's taking her home. He drives a few blocks from her house, tells her to take care, and then drives away.
From March to September 1984, a dark-haired, mustached rapist kills 7 women. Most of his victims were last seen in a particularly seedy area in Tampa, Florida, surrounding Nebraska Avenue. On November 3rd, 1984, the serial murderer switches tactics. He abducts 17-year-old Lisa McVeigh as she rides her bike home from work. He holds McVeigh hostage for 26 hours, but doesn't kill her, choosing instead to drive her home.
Once released, Lisa rushes home and tells her parents that she had been abducted by a white male in his 30s with a mustache and dark hair. She provides the same descriptive information of her assailant to police, but she also tells them that he drove a dark red Dodge Magnum with a red interior.
On November 6th, a woman horseback riding on her ranch finds severed body parts scattered throughout a field.
The body belongs to 18-year-old Virginia Johnson. It appears as though she's been dead for 2 weeks.
The body is basically just bones. but a leash is still attached to the victim's neck, and red carpet fibers are found in her hair.
The police realized that we still have a killer on the loose.
Johnson was last seen on Nebraska Avenue, walking to the Alamo Lounge where she waitressed. It's the same area frequented by murder victims Karen Dinsfriend and Lana Long.
A few days later, 21-year-old dancer Kimberly Swan is reported missing by her family.
Swan danced at the Sly Fox Lounge on Nebraska Avenue. She was last seen driving on Dale Mabry Highway.
To the horror of her family and friends, her body's found on November 12th. It had been dumped under an overpass. When police arrive at the scene, they find Kimberly laying face down with her legs spread apart.
On November 13th, 1984, the FBI Crime Lab confirms that red fibers collected from the Lisa McVeigh kidnapping case match the red fibers retrieved from all of the murder victims. Police take a closer look at McVeigh's statement.
The most critical piece of information she afforded to authorities was the fact we have a maroon Dodge Magnum red carpet fibers.
Task force investigators then obtain a list of every single registered Dodge Magnum in the state of Florida. One vehicle stands out. Police eventually locate the Dodge Magnum. They pull it over and begin a search. The owner appears to be cooperative. He even allows law enforcement to take his photograph. With no concrete evidence at the time, law enforcement authorities let the driver go.
They then take the photographs of the driver back to Lisa McVeigh.
She identifies the person in the photo as her attacker, Bobby Joe Long.
Who is Robert Bobby Joe Long?
Bobby Joe Long was born in West Virginia in 1953. At the age of 2, his parents divorced, and he moves to Florida with his mother.
His mother works at a bar called Big Daddy's, and she is gone till all hours.
Long's mother brings home a different man almost every night.
That's a resentment which he will harbor the rest of his life.
As a teenager, he becomes kind of a bully, has a very aggressive attitude.
One shining moment takes place in January 1974, when Bobby marries his high school sweetheart, Cindy Bartlett. But their wedded bliss is short-lived.
In March of 1974, right after their marriage, Bobby Joe gets into a motorcycle accident which almost kills him and suffers severe brain trauma as well as trauma to his shoulders and legs. He's in the hospital for several months, much of that time spent in a coma state.
While he's recovering, hospital personnel notice severe personality changes, a vastly shorter temper, and an insatiable appetite for sex.
Once he leaves the hospital, he loses his job. He ends up spending much time at home, lashing out a lot at Cindy.
He is now going to become very abusive, both emotionally and physically, toward his wife. Cindy at one point becomes so frustrated with the situation that while Bobby is sleeping, she places a gun to his head. She can't shoot him, but she does realize after this incident that there's no possible way she can stay with him.
In 1980, Bobby Joe and Cindy divorce. Many believe this was the triggering point for Bobby Joe, which would next lead to a life of violence.
In November 1984, authorities in Hillsborough County, Florida, hunt down Bobby Joe Long.
Although Lisa McVeigh had been held hostage and blindfolded for over 26 hours, during that time, she was able to catch glimpses under her blindfold of Bobby Joe Long. Had it not been for her description, he may have well carried on his violent acts for years to come.
Tampa, Florida, Friday, November 16th, 1984. Cops gear up to move on Bobby Joe Long.
Bobby Joe Long is located at a local movie theater and arrested.
Long is transported to Hillsborough County Sheriff's headquarters for questioning.
Okay, what happened then? I tried to strangle her, but it didn't work.
How'd you try to strangle her?
With something, not with my hands, with something else.
You remember what that was?
No, I don't know what it was.
Okay, and then what happened?
And then I stabbed her with the knife.
During post-arrest interrogation, he confesses to murdering 8 women.
Okay, you had sex with her, and then what'd you do?
Strangled her.
And what'd you strangle her with?
I don't really remember.
He expressed no regret, no remorse, and said that he would kill whenever he had the urge to do so.
During his interview, Long drops one final bombshell on detectives. He tells them that, prior to the murders, he committed dozens of rapes across the state of Florida.
What other rapes did you do, Bob?
We were sent down in Miami and Lauderdale.
And how long ago was this?
Goes back a long time.
Back to 74?
He's dubbed the classified ad rapist because his MO, or mode of operation, is to answer ads in the newspaper where he can single out women and show up at their house.
And if a woman answers the door alone, he pulls out a gun, beats, and violently rapes them.
Shortly afterwards, he moves on to homes with for sale by owner signs. This is another method he uses to single out and find prey.
Because the statute of limitations has expired, no charges are filed against Long in these serial rapes.
It's reported that Bobby Joe Long had committed more than 50 rapes before moving on to the next level of violence.
On November 16, 1984, the same day Long is apprehended, police discover a body floating in the Hillsborough River. It belongs to Vicki Elliott, a 21-year-old waitress who Bobby Joe had murdered 8 weeks prior. Elliott brings the body count to 9. 6 days later, investigators finally find the body of Artis Wick, the woman authorities believe Bobby Joe Long murdered first.
Eventually, Bobby Joe Long strikes a plea deal with the prosecution. He agrees to plead guilty to 8 charges of murder and to the rape and kidnapping of Lisa McVeigh.
When all is said and done, Bobby Joe Long receives 692 years, 39 life sentences, and 2 death sentences for his crimes.
He obviously hated women, hated his mother, and he just started killing. It's very tragic. All these women are dead, and he still lives.
Bobby Joe Long gives a series of TV interviews.
And you're talking about a lot of lives just gone right down the tubes because of me. And it's not a good feeling. It's not a pleasant feeling. I'm not proud of anything I've done. And the worst thing is I don't understand why. I don't understand why.
Detroit, Michigan, Tuesday, January 24th, 2012, 5:30 p.m. Jane Bashara wraps up a long workday downtown.
Jane Bashara is a wife, a mother of 2 kids, and a marketing manager for an energy consultant company. She has a bachelor's degree and an MBA, and she's a hard worker with family and with her business.
The 56-year-old businesswoman says goodbye to her employees, then makes the 7-mile drive home to the upper-class suburb of Grosse Pointe Park.
The last known sighting of Jane was 5:30. She was leaving work. Her co-workers remember very well her leaving.
Grosse Pointe Park, Michigan, Tuesday, January 24th, 2012, 7:50 p.m. Jane's husband, Bob, arrives home. He notices his wife's car isn't in the driveway, and she's nowhere to be found.
Bob claims he called around to some friends and family, finally calling his son around 9 o'clock. Nobody could give any information as to where she may be. During the same time frame, Bob is calling his wife's cell phone repeatedly, but she's not picking up. Finally, sometime before midnight, Bob decided to call the police and report her as a missing person.
My name is Bob Bashara. I live on Middlesex, and I don't want to overreact, and maybe this is too soon to call, but my wife is not around.
He tells the dispatcher when he's on the phone that she's been gone a few hours and this is out of the ordinary, her car's not here.
And I didn't get home until 10 to 8. I'm just working my stupid rental.
Around 6 a.m. the next morning, a tow truck operator driving through a seedy East Detroit neighborhood spots something odd.
He's out driving around the streets looking for stolen cars, and he comes upon a Mercedes SUV parked in an alley between a couple of abandoned buildings.
He calls in his dispatcher, who happens to find out from the police that that car is wanted in an investigation involving a missing person.
Investigators rush to the scene.
But police inspect the car and they find the remains of Jane Bashara.
Jane's keys are lying on the driver's side floor. Her purse, containing her checkbook and cell phone, is strewn across the passenger side floor. A prescription bottle with her name easily visible is on the front passenger seat. It's clear to detectives that the crime scene has been staged.
Jane is found in the back seat of her car. She's without her shoes.
They note that there are some small leaves attached to the underside of the left sock on her foot, and there's a pair of tan bedroom slippers stuffed under the front driver's seat.
Her jacket was taken off her and put on her backwards, almost like a straitjacket.
CSI finds broken fingernails at the scene and in Jane's SUV, evidence suggesting she fought back against her attacker. What began as a missing persons case is now a full-blown homicide investigation, the first in Grosse Pointe Park, Michigan, in more than 20 years.
Naturally, in any investigation of a murder, the people closest to the victim have to be interviewed and talked to first.
At the top of the list is Jane's husband, the man known adoringly in the community as Big Bob. In photos, the Basharas look like a happy couple.
The Basharas were well known within Grosse Pointe as well as the general Michigan area. Bob Bashara, 55 years old, is a successful businessman owning numerous real estate properties throughout the area.
Bob is well respected, and he and his wife Jane are active in their community. They're active in their local church. They have 2 children, Robert Jr. and Jessica.
Grosse Pointe Park, Michigan, Wednesday, January 25th, 2012, 10:30 a.m. Police visit Bob Bashara at home.
They notify him that his wife's body has been found in her car in Michigan.
Oddly, he starts talking about where he was the day before. He's getting very defensive, but he didn't seem to be asking the right questions or providing the right answers at this point.
And he showed no concern at all for his wife, and as a matter of fact, doesn't even mention her or her death until after he gives all his alibis. So the police are immediately suspicious.
The following day, January 26th, the medical examiner conducts an autopsy on Jane Bashara. According to the report, Jane suffered blunt force trauma to her upper body, head, face, and neck. Her windpipe had also been crushed, as though someone had violently stomped on her throat, which caused her to slowly die from strangulation. That evening, Bob Bashara visits the Grosse Pointe Park police station.
They asked if he'd take a polygraph exam. He agreed to do so, and his results were inconsistent. The investigators had more questions than answers the more they talked to Bob Bashara.
And he explained that he had been out doing maintenance on one of his buildings, and that when he returned home, Jane wasn't there. The coldness in Bob Bashara is something that startles the investigators, and they immediately believe that there's some involvement between Bob Bashara and the murder of his wife, Jane.
While Bashara is at the station house, investigators execute a search warrant on the family home. They photograph the interior and remove computers and documents as evidence.
They went into the garage, swabbed it for all kinds of evidence, and in fact found blood on the garage floor.
Forensic materials are sent to the state crime lab for testing, but it will take several weeks for the results to come back. Even though police don't currently have any evidence linking Bashara to his wife's murder, they officially name him a person of interest. In the meantime, Bob Bashara seems every bit like the concerned husband in front of television cameras.
We wish to thank the hundreds and hundreds of supporters and people who have shown their love and respect for my Jane.
On January 31st, 2012, hundreds attend Jane Bashara's funeral, including her husband.
By the morning of Jane's funeral, the media had picked up on a few aspects of the investigation. Somehow they learned that there was more than one person possibly involved in her murder.
6 hours earlier, in the middle of the night, a man had walked into the Grosse Pointe Park police station and made a stunning confession.
He literally tells the desk sergeant, "I'm here to confess to the murder of Jane Bashara."
I hit her.
And you hit her?
Back of the neck. I knocked her down.
Is she knocked out?
No, she didn't get knocked out.
What happens next?
So I went to pick her up.
Why does he pick you?
I'm a pawn, basically.
On January 25th, 2012, police in Detroit, Michigan find the body of 56-year-old wife and mother Jane Bashara inside her Mercedes-Benz SUV, which is abandoned in an alley. Grosse Pointe Park, Michigan, Tuesday, January 31st, 2012, 4:30 a.m. Joe Gentz, a handyman Bob Bashara is known for several months, walks into police headquarters and drops a bombshell.
Joe Gentz says to the investigators he wants to confess to the murder. He tells them right up front he's the one who killed Jane Bashara.
He tells me he wants his wife hit. He goes, I want you to do this job. He's on a deadline.
Bob says, hey, I'm on a deadline or you're on a deadline.
He is on a deadline. Bob's on a deadline.
Okay.
Now, I'm like, what do you mean you're on a deadline? He says, I gotta have this done immediately.
According to Gentz, Bob initially wanted him to kill his wife in a hit-and-run car accident. The next idea was to have her die in an accidental fall.
This is what he said. I give you $5 grand if I knock out his wife. He wanted to look like she fell off the roof of the house.
His story is a little bit rambling and inconsistent because he's a mentally challenged man. an IQ in the mid-50s, and he's not someone that's immediately able to convey what they're trying to say. The police see this, but there are aspects of what he tells them which seem credible.
Gentz explains that around 7 p.m. on January 24, 2012, he's helping Bashara move boxes in the family garage when his wife enters.
Jane comes into the garage and then is angry at Bob, saying, "You need to get some of these boxes out of here. They're all filled with junk. They're stacked so high. They're making the place cramped. There's no room to do anything in the garage."
She's yelling and screaming at Bob.
What's she saying?
I want this out of here. Take your damn golf clubs to Lockmore Country Club. And Bob says, shut the woman up now.
According to Gentz, that's when Bashara snaps.
He pulls a gun out, points it at Joe, and then tells Joe to end it.
I look down a barrel and I'm like, oh.
What happens next?
He says, take her out. I'm taking you. Bob was going to shoot me.
Okay.
I hit her.
Big 6'4", 260-pound Joe Gentz punched the woman in her head. She went down.
She's laying on the garage floor, and then Bob Bashara points the gun at Joe and says, "Finish her now." Gentz takes his boot, crushes her throat, and ends up killing Jane on the floor of the garage.
Bob says, take care of her. And I went, bam, took her neck out with my boot. And I was
Does he see you step on her neck?
Yep, seen the whole damn thing. Bob says, make sure she's dead.
Gentz claims he and Bashara dumped Jane's body into the back of a Mercedes-Benz SUV. Then he drives the vehicle to Detroit's east side.
Bob follows Gentz in his own vehicle, and then Gentz gets out of her car, leaving the car in an alley, and at that point, Bob drives away, leaving Gentz to fend for himself.
Even with the confession, there's no concrete evidence to back up Gentz's story.
The police aren't exactly sure what they have with Joe Gentz, and they're a bit wary of this man.
Joe is not immediately arrested. He's allowed to leave.
In the meantime, damaging reports about Bob Bashara begin to surface in the media.
The police are trying to put the heat on Bob Bashara as a suspect. Bob Bashara, this upstanding businessman there in Grosse Pointe, Michigan, is discovered to be having something of a double life.
He's into the world of S&M and involving himself with all kinds of sadomasochistic behavior.
The real estate investor reportedly feeds his fetish for kink inside one of his most prominent properties, the Hard Luck Cafe. He even appears in promotional videos for the venue.
In the basement of that cafe is at least one of his sex dungeons.
Police discover that he's carrying on a long-term affair with a woman named Rachel Gillette.
The two met back in August 2008 through a BDSM website.
Bob has the nickname Master Bob, and in emails back and forth with Rachel, he refers to her as Slave R.
Initially, Bob lies to Gillette, telling her he's divorced.
Bob told her he was in a sexless marriage with his wife. She broke it off with Bob numerous times, but he would email her, he would text her, he would call her. He wouldn't give up.
Eventually, in the fall of 2011, Bob has so convinced Rachel that she's his woman and that he is in fact done with his relationship with Jane, that the two start house shopping together after Bob gives her a promise ring.
On January 31st, 2012, exactly 1 week after Jane Bashara is found strangled to death inside her abandoned SUV, a handyman named Joe Gentz confesses to her murder. Gentz tells police Jane's husband Bob hired him to kill his wife. Grosse Pointe Park, Michigan, Thursday, March 1st, 2012. Investigators get DNA results back from blood samples they collected inside the Bashara family garage.
It's determined that Joe Gentz's DNA and Jane Bashara's DNA and blood are both found in the garage. Joe Gentz is in fact involved in the murder of Jane Bashara, and so Joe is arrested.
But as the handyman waits for a hearing to determine if he's competent to stand trial, investigators uncover a deadly plot orchestrated by Bob Bashara to eliminate Joe Gentz.
He wanted to kill Joe Gentz, who we know could be a viable witness against him. So he contacted his friend Steve, the man who originally introduced him to Joe, and asked for him to set up a hit.
The Steve Bashara gets in touch with is Steve Thibodeau, a furniture salesman in Detroit. Bashara offers him $20 grand to take out Joe Gentz.
Thibodeau was very uncomfortable with this scenario and went to the police.
The police immediately involved the FBI.
The plot was now thickening.
East Detroit, Michigan, Monday, June 25th, 2012. Bob Bashara meets Steve Thibodeau at his appliance store to finalize the hit. Bashara is acting paranoid.
Bob starts patting Steve down and says, if you're wearing a wire, just go ahead and shoot me now, he jokes. And in fact, he's not wearing a wire, but he's wearing a transmitter inside his shirt pocket, and it's a car key fob that's actually a recording device and a transmitter, and it's being monitored by the FBI. The FBI gets a crisp, clear recording of Bob Bashara giving Steve Thibodeau the $2,000 down payment on the $20,000 hit fee, and he literally asks Thibodeau for a receipt.
Bashara leaves the store and returns to one of his properties in Grosse Pointe Park to have a beer. Cops arrest him there. They charge him with solicitation to commit murder. 4 months later, in October 2012, Bashara strikes a deal. He speaks in court and seems genuinely remorseful.
My actions in this case understandably result in many of my friends wanted to have nothing to do with me.
Bob pleads guilty for the solicitation of murder of Joe Gentz, and his sentence is 6.5 to 20 years.
Prison time also seems imminent for handyman Joe Gentz, the only suspect in Jane Bashara's murder.
The courts did rule that he was competent to stand trial.
Joe is trying to avoid the maximum penalty in this case, and so Joe takes a plea deal. He's sentenced for 17 to 28 years in state prison for the murder of Jane Bashara. It's a second-degree murder charge.
Bashara and Gentz behind bars for separate offenses. But for prosecutors, justice for Jane is far from done. By October 2014, 56-year-old real estate investor Bob Bashara has been sitting in jail for nearly 2 years after pleading guilty to soliciting the murder of his handyman Joe Gentz, who's ironically the hitman Bashara allegedly hired that killed his wife Jane back in January 2012.
Bob was successful, but not making the money that Jane was making as a professional businesswoman. She also had a sizable 401k, and Bob would have netted a six-figure profit by her loss.
Armed with Gentz's confession, as well as blood and DNA evidence linking Bashara to his wife's murder, the Wayne County District Attorney goes after Bob Bashara for murder one.
On October 7, 2014, the trial of Bob Bashara begins.
The prosecution argues that while handyman Joe Gentz is the one who physically killed Jane Bashara, it's Bob who ordered him to do it. Gentz refuses to testify at Bashara's trial, but dozens of others do.
In the first week alone, over 70 witnesses are called, and many, many more would ultimately testify in this case against him.
Prosecutors call Bashara's longtime mistress, Rachel Gillette, to the stand.
Rachel's an important witness because the propensity of Bob to lie, cheat, and do everything else against his wife builds up the case that he really didn't care about Jane Bashara, his wife.
Some of the most explosive testimony, which points toward Bob Bashara's possible motive for wanting his wife dead, comes from real estate agent Kathy Young.
Kathy Young testified that in August of 2011, she showed Bob and his mistress Rachel houses in the area. They seemed to be actively interested in buying a home together, including both their names listed on the real estate application.
The closing date of the house he and Rachel were purchasing together is 3 days after the death of Jane Bashara. So literally 3 days after his wife has been murdered, he's purchasing a new house with his mistress.
The defense maintains there's plenty of reasonable doubt. In closing arguments, Bashara's attorneys emphasized detectives made a rush to judgment when they named Bob a person of interest 2 days after his wife's death. On December 18, 2014, the jury renders its decision.
After about 6 days of deliberating, the jury came back with their verdict, guilty on all 5 counts.
The following month, Bashara learns his ultimate fate at sentencing, but not before he hears stern words from Judge Vonda Evans.
Master Bob, jack of manipulation, master of none. The only person you ever loved was yourself. Just like a predator, you use social media, the BDSM lifestyle, your family, your friends, to allure your victims with lies about whom you were and what you wanted. You destroy your life, and the lives you touch were damaged by your touch. I have no mercy for you.
Bob Bashara is sentenced to a life in prison.
He wanted her gone. He accomplished that goal. However, he never thought he'd be spending, most likely, the rest of his life in prison.
In July 2015, Bashara files a motion seeking a new trial, claiming that he wasn't given a fair trial the first go-around. Then, In January 2016, convicted handyman Joe Gens drops a bombshell that contradicts earlier statements he made about Bob's involvement in Jane's murder.
Joe Gens signed various affidavits stating that the detectives put words in his mouth and essentially elicited a false confession from him.
In the affidavit, Gens claims that he acted alone in killing Jane Bashara because he was angry Bob hadn't paid him for odd jobs he completed at Bashara's rental properties. But during an April 2016 hearing to see if Bob Bashara gets a new trial, Gens testifies that what's written in the affidavit is all a lie. As for Bashara, his future remains in limbo. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Wednesday, November 26, 1986. 11 p.m. 25-year-old prostitute Josefina Rivera is at home fighting with her boyfriend. She storms out and hits the corner of 3rd and Girard Avenue.
She's approached by an individual who's in a brand new, shiny Cadillac.
They agree on a price for sex.
Josefina has a rule that she sticks to, which is not to go back to men's houses, but on this occasion, she breaks that rule.
The stranger drives her back to his house, which is located in a rough section of North Philadelphia. At the residence, Josefina notices the man unlocking the door with half of a broken key. The other half is stuck inside the lock.
The man leads Josefina to the bedroom, and they have sex. Just as she's getting ready to leave, he then attacks her and then handcuffs her, taking her down into the cold, dark basement. Josefina notices that there's a pit that's been dug in the middle of it.
He shoves Josefina onto a bare mattress, puts a muffler clamp around her ankle, then pours crazy glue over the bolt and nuts.
She is ultimately chained to a standpipe. He and Josephine sit down on the mattress together.
The bearded man then lies down, resting his head in her lap. Eventually, they both fall asleep.
When she wakes up, he's no longer there. The man does, in fact, return. He offers her juice, he offers her food, but she declines both of these, fearing that they're drugged.
Josefina's captor starts digging in the pit. As he's widening the hole, he tells her his plan.
He intends to kidnap 10 additional women and to procreate a very large family.
He tells Josefina society owes him a wife and family for the 4 kids that were taken from him. Soon, he stops digging, forces her to have sex, then leaves.
Josefina realizes this is her chance to escape and manages to loosen the leg irons. And she pulls herself to the basement window and starts to pull herself out of it, but she can't pull her whole body through. So she screams and screams, hoping that someone will hear her. Unfortunately, the only person who hears her is her abductor.
He yanks Josefina back through the window, beats her with a stick, and forces her into the pit. Then, he compresses her body down using a plywood board topped with bags of dirt.
He brings the radio down, turning the volume up to mask the sounds of her pleas for help. She's there for approximately 27 hours in that position.
North Philadelphia, Saturday, November 29th, 1986, 4 p.m. Josefina's abductor enters the basement with a new captive, 24-year-old Sandra Lindsay, who's mentally handicapped.
She's placed down there in the same area as Josephine. Oddly enough, she tells Josephine that she knows who this individual is. She's actually become pregnant by this individual and that he's treated her very nicely in the past.
Sandra tells Josefina their captor's name is Gary. Meanwhile, her mother had been frantic ever since Sandra failed to return home from a trip to the drugstore.
Sandra's mum goes to the mental health facility that Sandra attended, and one of the men that she spoke to said that she should try Gary's house and gives her the address.
The helpful man is Gary's friend, Cyril Tony Brown. Armed with a phone number and address, Sandra's sister calls Gary's house. He picks up, says Sandy's not there, then hangs up abruptly. Next, her mother goes to the residence with 2 cousins and pounds on the door. Again, no answer. The family even canvasses the neighborhood with Sandra's photo and stakes out the area, but to no avail.
Sandy's mother, at this point, goes to the police station and reports this entire situation. The police are, in fact, going to initiate the investigation.
Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Monday, December 1st, 1986. Police track down and interview Tony Brown. He gives them Gary's last name, but doesn't spell it correctly, so nothing comes up in law enforcement's database.
That same day, the police go to 3520 North Marshall Street and they ring the bell, but nobody answers. They try the phone too, and again, nobody answers.
A week later, Sandra's mother receives a Christmas card in her daughter's handwriting. It's postmarked from New York and reads, "Dear Mom, I am all right. Don't worry. Love, Sandy."
The police then close the missing person report.
Cops officially conclude that Sandra is missing voluntarily, leaving Gary free and clear to continue treating his two captives, Sandra and Josefina, like prisoners of war.
Josefina and Sandra are only allowed to wear thin shirts. The women huddle together for warmth in the dark and cold basement, and although they ask continuously for more clothes and blankets, their abductor ignores their plight. The women are starved, and he gives them the bare minimum just to keep them alive.
North Philadelphia, Monday, December 22nd, 1986, 2 p.m. 19-year-old high school dropout and mother, Lisa Thomas, is walking down Lehigh Avenue to her girlfriend's house.
She's approached by a man in a Cadillac, asks if she wants to see him expose himself to her.
She becomes angry and says, "No, of course I don't. I'm not a prostitute." He then apologizes to her and he offers her a lift, which she eventually accepts. He then says that they should go and get something to eat.
The two grab a bite to eat at a local Fridays.
The man very cleverly asks her if she wants to go to Atlantic City with him. She's anticipating dinners in a nice hotel room and gambling and money.
She says she has nothing to wear, so they go on a shopping spree to Sears, where he buys her lots of clothes, and he then takes her back to his house to try them all on.
Back at his house, Gary gives Lisa wine coolers.
And the wine has a reaction with some allergy tablets that she's taking, and the next thing she remembers, she's lying on the bed and he's having sex with her.
After he finishes, she asks if she can go back to the location where he picked her up.
Gary refuses. Instead, he chokes Lisa, handcuffs her, then leads her down into the basement.
Once in the basement, he retrieves Josefina and Sandra from the pit.
Gary introduces Lisa to his other captives. He brings all three women peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, then leaves.
10 days after Lisa is abducted, another woman joins the other captives in the basement. Her name is Deborah Dudley, and she's 23 years old. According to Josefina, Deborah was loud and non-compliant and determined to do things her own way. She wasn't popular with the other women because she upset the status quo, and when she was non-compliant, it meant that they were all beaten.
North Philadelphia, Sunday, January 18th, 1987. 18-year-old prostitute Jacqueline Askins is on the streets hooking.
Jacqueline Askins is outside a rundown hotel on the seedier sides of Philadelphia. She is picked up by an individual driving a blue van.
He drives Jacqueline back to his home, and he has sex with her. He then handcuffs her and leads her down to the basement and shackles her to the ceiling. That day, he's in a good mood, believing Josefina and Sandra to be pregnant.
But none of the women are pregnant. They're actually in bad shape.
On February the 7th, 1987, Sandra is trying to remove the plywood that covers the pit.
When her captor comes down and confronts her, she states that she's sick and she has refused any type of medical treatment whatsoever.
By way of punishment, she's forced to hang from the roof by one handcuff attached to her wrist.
Due to the fact that the captor believes that she's pregnant, he force feeds her bread.
Sandra eventually collapses. Thinking she's faking it, Gary puts her into the pit.
When he returns, he lifts Sandra out of the pit and checks her pulse. He realizes at this point that she's dead, and she'd actually choked on a piece of bread that was in her mouth.
Gary carries Sandra Lindsay's body upstairs.
The other women hear a very loud noise of either a power saw or a chainsaw. Sandra is dismembered, and he places some of her remains in a food processor and then mixes it with dog food and feeds it to his dogs and the other women.
Those portions that he can't grind down were placed into a freezer in bags. He boiled the rib cage and other portions of her body.
The smell is extremely pungent, and a neighbor calls the police. And when a rookie cop arrives and questions him about it, he just claims that he's overcooked a roast.
The officer buys his story and leaves.
Gary, now after Sandy's death, believes that the other women are plotting against him, and he starts taking precautions by playing the radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Then, to keep the women from knowing where he is in the house, he performs a monstrously cruel act to each girl, except Josefina.
He gags all the women and destroys their eardrums with a screwdriver.
On March the 18th, 1987, he decides that they all need to be punished.
He orders Josefina to fill the pit with water. Lisa, Debbie, and Jacqueline, still in chains, are told to get in. Next, He strips an extension cord to expose the bare wires, then hands it to Josefina.
According to Josefina, she then starts giving all the women a shock using an electrical current, but Deborah Dudley gets the worst of it all. She starts screaming, and then she suddenly stops. The man realizes that Deborah's dead.
Gary takes Deborah's body and puts it in the freezer.
Josephine is forced to write a letter confessing that she was the one that was directly responsible for the death.
Josefina is told that if she ever goes to the police, this letter will be used as evidence against her and will show that she was the one that killed Deborah.
After nearly 4 months in captivity, Josefina Rivera has finally earned Gary's trust.
At this point, Josephina is unchained. She's clean, she's fed, she's given new clothes, so he starts to treat her more as a girlfriend.
4 days later, Gary asks Josefina to help him get rid of Deborah's body.
On March the 22nd, 1987, Josefina is told to get Deborah's body out of the freezer and wrap it in a blanket.
They load the body into the trunk of Gary's car, then drive 30 miles to a remote location in New Jersey called the Pine Barrens. There, they dump Deborah Dudley on the side of a dirt road. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Monday, March 23rd, 1987. Gary and his most loyal prisoner, Josefina Rivera, drive the streets, hunting for a new woman to add to the harem.
Agnes Adams is a 24-year-old prostitute who also works at a strip joint. On March 23rd, 1987, she's working on the corner of 5th and Girard.
Agnes Adams knows Josefina because they've worked previously together.
Agnes knows Gary too. He'd picked her up for sex a couple months earlier. That night, he spots her again. He pulls over and offers her $35 to get into the car.
Agnes accompanies Josephine and the man back to their residence. And again, it's the exact same MO. He has sex with her, and then he beats her, chokes her, and then chains her down to the basement with the other women.
The following day, Josefina plots her escape.
March 24th, 1987, Josephina manages to convince Gary to allow her to go visit her family.
In return, Josefina must bring Gary a new woman for the harem. He tells her he'll kill the others if she tries to run.
The two work out a plan where Josefina will go and see her children and then go and meet a woman that she knows, and she'd meet back up with him at a gas station and that they'd all go back to the house.
Gary drops Josefina off at a gas station 3 blocks away on Girard Avenue, then drives off.
She immediately deviates from the initial established plan and goes straight over to her ex-boyfriend's house. Now she starts rambling on and screaming about other women that are chained to a basement.
Because the story is so incredulous at first, he doesn't believe her, but they agree to call the police. The police also struggle to believe her story, but when they see the abrasions and scars on her ankles from the chains, this seems to corroborate exactly what she's been saying. Josefina directs the police to 3520 North Marshall Street, a house that belongs to a man called Gary Heidnick.
Cops arrive at the address, but must wait for a search warrant to enter. In the meantime, additional officers descend on the gas station, where Josefina promised she'd meet Gary. They find Heidnick waiting there in his car.
Police handcuff Heidnick and take him to the sex crimes unit at the Philadelphia Police Department.
North Philadelphia, Tuesday, March 25th, 1987, 5 a.m. Armed with a search warrant and a crowbar, officers break into Gary Heidnick's house.
Upon entering Heidnick's home, 2 officers head straight to the basement. There they find 2 women who are shackled together. One of the captives points to the pit, and the officers lift the plywood, and Agnes appears. And she's not only chained, but she's also been handcuffed with her hands behind her back. The officers notice that the women are covered in bruises.
Investigators are even more horrified by what they find in Heidnick's kitchen.
They find a pot that was used to boil Deborah Dudley's head. Inside the actual oven, there's a large roasting tin with a large piece of rib. On the counter, there's a heavy-duty processor, which looks like it's had human remains in it. And when they open the freezer, they find a human forearm.
Gary Heidnick is held on a multitude of charges, including kidnapping, rape, and murder.
When the police do in fact apprehend him, he's got over $2,000 in cash. He has all of his debit cards and credit cards. He's got his VA card.
Most notably, Heidnick has an October 1986 bank statement from Merrill Lynch showing his investment portfolio to be to the tune of just over $500,000.
On March 25th, 1987, police in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania arrest 44-year-old Gary Heidnick. Heidnick's charged with 19 criminal counts, including first-degree murder, rape, and kidnapping for his deranged treatment of 6 women he kept hostage in his basement. He pleads not guilty.
The Philadelphia District Attorney, rightly so, sought the death penalty.
Gary Michael Heidnick is born November 22nd, 1943 in Ohio. His father was a strict disciplinarian, and he would shame the young Heidnick. Heidnick's mother, Ellen, was allegedly an alcoholic.
In November 1961, 18-year-old Gary joins the Army and is deployed to East Germany.
In August 1962, Heidnick goes to the doctors complaining of blurred vision and headaches. A neurologist then diagnoses him as suffering from a mental illness, possibly schizophrenia. Heidnick is given an honorable discharge and settles in Philadelphia.
In 1970, Gary's mother commits. Following her death, he tries to kill himself, but survives.
From 1962 to 1987, when he's ultimately arrested, Gary attempts approximately 13 times.
During that same period, Heidnick's hospitalized more than 20 times.
While being treated for paranoid schizophrenia in a mental hospital, Gary decides he's going to start his own church.
Heidnick starts the United Church of the Ministers of God with 5 members in October 1971. Many of his eventual congregants come from a facility for mentally challenged individuals.
In 1976, Heidnick moves in with his girlfriend, Anjanette Davidson, who's a vulnerable woman with a very low IQ, and she gets pregnant with his baby. Heidnick is incredibly controlling. He doesn't allow her to see the doctor, and he puts her on a strict diet.
When she's in her 3rd trimester, she's 8 months, she's only gained a total of 5 pounds.
One day, Anjanette's sister visits, sees her condition, and removes her from Gary's home. But this doesn't end the relationship.
Anjanette has the baby, which is later put into foster care.
2 months later, in May 1978, Gary takes Anjanette to see her sister Alberta, who's institutionalized in a mental health facility.
Gary signs Alberta out for a short pass. He never returns with her. When Alberta fails to return to the mental institution, they're trying to find her and locate her.
The next day, they search for Alberta back at Heidnick's, and they find her in an unused storage area in the basement.
For his actions against Alberta, Heidnick receives a prison sentence of 3 to 7 years. He is paroled from prison in April 1983.
Gary starts to correspond with a mail-order bride by the name of Betty from the Philippines.
In 1985, Betty arrives in Philadelphia and marries Heidnick.
The newlyweds live at Heidnick's recently purchased row home at 3520 North Marshall Street. Almost immediately, Betty realizes she's made a terrible mistake.
The relationship is abusive and controlling, and Betty walks in on Heidnick, who's in bed with 3 women. He assures her that this is all normal behavior in America, and when she isn't compliant, he punches her in the face and makes her stand in the corner for 14 hours.
By January 1986, after just 3.5 months of marriage, Betty wants out.
Gary is subsequently arrested for spousal rape, but unfortunately, those charges are dropped. In fall of '86, Betty does in fact give birth to a boy. She takes a picture of it and sends a photograph to Gary.
This enrages Gary. The boy is the 2nd child he's fathered that a woman will not let him raise. 1 month later, in November 1986, Heidnick starts carrying out his twisted blueprint to ensure it never happens again.
He's going to start his own Heidnick baby farm, as he puts it.
Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Monday, June 20th, 1988. The Gary Heidnick trial begins downtown at the Court of Common Pleas. All 4 of Heidnick's surviving victims testify against him.
Heidnick's defense attorney tries to have the jury believe that he's legally insane.
The strategy could work, except the prosecution points out that Heidnick turned a $1,500 investment into more than $500,000.
After only 16 hours of deliberation, jury does convict Gary.
The jury find him guilty on 18 counts, including the murders of Deborah Dudley and Sandra Lindsay, and they sentence him to death.
Heidnick spends the next 11 years on death row.
July 6, 1999, Gary is in fact executed.
Mesa, Arizona, Wednesday, June 4th, 2008, 5:25 p.m. 29-year-old businessman Travis Alexander is showering in the comfort of his own home. His 2 roommates are out of town, but he's not alone.
At his house, Travis Alexander will sustain a gunshot wound to the head, 27 stab wounds, and he will also sustain a laceration of the neck, which is almost to the spine from ear to ear.
The killer leaves Alexander's body slumped on the shower floor. Over the next 5 days, Travis's friends grow increasingly concerned after he misses an important business meeting and fails to answer or return calls. Finally, on Monday, June 9th, they pay a visit to his home.
They enter the residence to a horrific scene.
What's going on?
A friend of ours is dead in his bedroom. We hadn't heard from him for a while.
Hello. Hi, so what's going on?
He's dead. He's in his bedroom in the shower. Everyone's been wondering about him for a few days.
Mesa police arrive and find no signs of robbery or forced entry.
For a crime scene description, the police refer to it as basically a butchering of a human body. It's obviously a homicide.
Officers take statements from Travis's roommates, friends, and ex-girlfriends. The name they give detectives is Jodi Arias.
The friends describe Jodi Arias as an ex-girlfriend, someone who's obsessive, who's jealous, and suggest that the detectives find her.
Crime scene investigators uncover an abundance of forensic evidence left behind in the bloodbath.
A spent .25 auto shell casing is found. You can tell by blood spray pattern analysis that there was obviously a fairly fierce struggle.
Hair fibers are collected from the floor and the baseboards. Some of the hair fibers are very long and clearly don't belong to Travis.
Investigators notice a load of laundry in the washing machine. They check it and make a discovery that stops them in their tracks.
They find a camera which has been run through a cycle in an obvious attempt to destroy the memory card.
The detectives are able to remove the memory card from the camera with hopes that it will identify the perpetrator.
Detectives soon learn that Travis was supposed to travel to Cancun, Mexico with an ex-girlfriend, Marie Hall. They question Hall about Travis and his other exes. Without hesitation, she mentions the name Jodi Arias and describes her as a stalker.
Pretty much at the outset, they were able to go, okay, we need to talk to this gal, because obviously what they're telling us here is an individual who has a lot of issues, certainly psychological, and certainly possessive and very jealous in nature.
On June 10th, the day after Travis's body is discovered, lead detective Esteban Flores receives multiple phone calls from Arias.
Not only is she calling detectives, but she's apparently leaving voice messages on their answer machines to get a hold of her so that she can help them in the investigation.
From her home in Wairika, California, Jodi tells police she hasn't seen Travis Alexander in over 2 months. A week later, Jodi travels to Mesa to meet with detectives. She volunteers to be fingerprinted and provides a DNA sample.
She's willing to do whatever she can to help in the discovery of the person that killed Travis.
The June 2008 murder of Travis Alexander sends shockwaves through the community of Mesa, Arizona. The successful businessman and leader in the Mormon Church seems like the last person on earth anyone would want dead.
He is single, he owns his house, he's got a fancy car, and for a young lady, this is it, catch of a lifetime.
Thursday, June 19th, 2008. Lab results finally come back from a memory card belonging to a camera found inside a washing machine at the crime scene. The recovered, time-stamped images are game-changing. They show Travis and Jodi together at various times on June 4th, the day Alexander was murdered. An image taken at 5:29 p.m. blows investigators away.
It's time-stamped, almost literally to the second, the exact time that the homicide occurred. When detectives really look at it and study it, in the reflection in Travis Alexander's eye, you can see the image of Jodi Arias taking the photograph.
On June 25th, Detective Flores calls Jodi and questions her about the photos.
Even though the detectives confront her with all the images of the two of them together, and it's time-stamped and date-stamped, she still denies ever having been there.
But what exactly is Jodi's alibi? Between June 3rd and June 5th, she claims she was driving to Salt Lake City to meet a man named Ryan Burns. Under questioning, Burns reveals that it took Jodi nearly 48 hours to complete what is normally an 11-hour drive. Police calculate the distances between where Jodi, Travis, and Ryan live. They estimate that Arias could have driven from Northern California to Travis's home then gone on to Utah, and still had up to 10 hours to spare.
We know that Jody rented a vehicle 100 miles from the place where she was living.
She removes the plate to avoid detection. She also turns off her cell phone so she can't be tracked.
That's not all. While she's on the road, Jody purchases gas cans at a Walmart, presumably so she doesn't have to stop for fuel in Arizona. When Arias finally returns the rental car, she's a day late and there are 2,800 additional miles on it and no floor mats. Then, cops discover an unsettling coincidence. The bullet retrieved from Travis Alexander's cheek matches the caliber of a gun that went missing from Jody's grandparents' house 8 days prior to the murder.
I don't know how you could get links that are any stronger than this.
By July 3rd, the complete DNA analysis is back from the crime lab. All of the evidence points to one person.
A bloody palm print, which was taken at the scene, contains the DNA of Jody Arias. They also have hair samples that match the DNA profile of Jody Arias. You can't email it, you can't FedEx it. I mean, it's there. It's captured on the crime scene at the time that the crime occurred.
Wairika, California, Tuesday, July 15th, 2008. Cops arrest Jody Arias at her grandparents' house. Detective Flores flies in from Mesa to interrogate her.
On July 15th and 16th, the detective spends hours interviewing Jody Arias, and she continues to deny any involvement. But what she does is very bizarre.
When the detectives are not in the room present with her, she is standing on her head. She is examining the audio recorder. She's kind of mumbling to herself.
You should have at least done your makeup, Jody. Gosh.
It's almost as if she's feigning crazy.
On day 2 of interrogations, Jody's temperament shifts dramatically.
Here, she is kind of swinging the whole mood scale. She's, giggling at one point, she's crying in the other point, she's talking to herself.
Detectives aren't sure if it's an act or not, but Jody plays the role of someone who wouldn't hurt a fly.
If I had planned to hurt him in any way, I don't think I could stab him. I think I would have to shoot him continuously until he was dead, if that were my intention. If I had it in me anywhere to kill him.
Even when officers present Jody with the overwhelming evidence against her and point blank accuse her of murder, she still maintains that she'd never hurt Travis.
Didn't take Travis's life.
You haven't convinced me. I hope you can convince the jury, but I doubt it very seriously.
On September 5th, police charge Arias with first-degree murder and extradite her to Phoenix, Arizona. She pleads not guilty. By September 2008, 14 weeks after Travis Alexander is savagely killed in his shower, Mesa, Arizona police have their prime suspect, 28-year-old Jody Arias, behind bars. Now, they go to work to figure out exactly who Jody is.
Jody Arias is a young woman who grew up in Salinas, California. She's one of 5 children, and we hear of 2 very different Jodys. She talks about being physically abused from the age of 7, yet there's no proof. And then she tells us that she lived an almost ideal childhood.
Jody Arias does have some people who state that there was nothing off about her. They liked her. She was very personable.
One of her friends describes her as someone who everyone wanted to be around.
Jody does not complete high school. She drops out of the 11th grade for whatever reason. She goes through a series of odd jobs. Ultimately, she finds herself working for prepaid legal services.
While working for prepaid legal, Jody meets Travis Alexander.
Travis Alexander has somewhat of a disturbing background, the fact that both of his parents are meth addicts. He is raised by his grandmother, who ultimately indoctrinates him into the Mormon Church.
The fateful encounter between Travis and Jody takes place in September 2006 at a convention in Las Vegas. For Arias, it's love at first sight.
They exchange, in a fairly short period of time, 82,000 emails back and forth.
The relationship is highly charged and highly sexual. 2 months after meeting, Jody becomes a Mormon, and shortly thereafter, she moves to Arizona to be with Travis.
Alexander and Arias date exclusively from February to June 2007. Then, Travis starts having second thoughts.
He now views Jody not as this lifelong soulmate, but rather as somebody who is leading him down a path of destruction that he is breaking the Mormon tenets, and at this point he decides that he needs to break off the relationship, and this is where it is now going to start turning south for both of them.
Despite the breakup, the exes continue a sexual relationship. While Jody remains hung up on Travis, he begins dating other women. Is this Jody's motive for murder?
When Jody finds this out, we're now going to flip the switch, and we're going to set a train in motion that will not be stopped under any circumstance.
According to Travis, once he's with new girlfriend Lisa Andrews, Jody got hostile.
He had complained that she was stalking him. She had come in through his dog door in the house and was walking around the house when he was sleeping.
She's threatening him. He believes that she slashed the tires on his car, and that she's also sending threatening emails not only to him, but to other women.
Lisa Andrews shows police one of the angry emails she received while dating Travis. In it, the anonymous sender calls her a shameful whore. While she can't prove it's from Jody, she and Travis both believed at the time that Arias was the one behind the message. But despite the threats, Travis still couldn't say no to the sex.
Jody is so determined to be a part of Travis's life that she even offers to clean his residence for $12.50 an hour, and Travis agrees. Travis is so addicted to the sexual relationship that he gives her keys to his residence to allow her to come and go freely.
Even though she moved back to California, Jody didn't stop prying into Travis's life. She allegedly stole his personal journals and hacked into his social media accounts. Travis eventually confronted Jody about her invasive behavior, but still allows her back into his home on June 4th.
He is absolutely stepping into uncharted territory. He has no idea that he is walking on still water filled with crocodiles.
In the aftermath of the brutal slaying of Travis Alexander, his 28-year-old ex-girlfriend and prime suspect, Jody Arias, becomes a household name. While prosecutors in Maricopa County, Arizona, build a case to bury her under the jail, Arias takes her story to the court of public opinion.
Jody grants an interview to a local newspaper, and in that interview she states in her arrogance that she's confident she'll be found not guilty in the murder of Travis Alexander.
2 weeks later, in a television interview, Jody does an about-face.
Jody offers another version as to how Travis was murdered. In this version of events, Jody says that she was with Travis, in fact, and that two people had entered the residence and had assaulted Travis, and she managed to escape.
Jody had already tried the home invasion narrative with cops. Under interrogation, she told them that a man and a woman dressed in black, one with a gun, the other with a knife, overcame Travis, then turned the gun on her.
She has no idea how it happened, but the individual with the gun points it at her, presses the trigger, nothing happens. Miraculously, she is spared.
She runs out of the residence. She's so fearful for her life that she just decides to not tell the police and pretend that this thing never happened.
I feel responsible because I feel that I could have done more. I feel that I should have gotten help. I feel that I should have been stronger.
You feel responsible because you did this.
I did not.
Jody,
kill Travis.
You did. And there's nothing you can say that'll change my mind.
Fast forward to August 2010. After sitting in jail for almost 2 years, Jody offers up yet another version of what happened the day Travis Alexander was killed.
The next story is the fact she was with Travis. She did, in fact, kill him, but it was an act of self-defense.
And what she describes is they had spent a day of sex and bondage, and she was using the camera to take some pictures of him. And in so doing, she damaged the camera, and that Travis had become so enraged and upset with the damage that she had caused to his camera that he attacked her. And in defense, she killed him.
Now she remembers having fired a shot, but doesn't remember anything else. It's a very convenient way of blacking out.
Phoenix, Arizona, Wednesday, January 2nd, 2013. The Jody Arias murder trial begins at Maricopa County Courthouse. With cameras allowed in the courtroom, the trial becomes must-see TV.
One of the things that makes it very compelling during the trial is that the salacious details come out about sex, about phone sex, about breathing heavy.
Explicit text messages are shared. A 30-minute telephone conversation is played where the couple are discussing sexual experimentation with Pop Rocks and Tootsie Rolls.
Prosecutors argue that Jody premeditated Travis's murder.
What they believe is that she had plotted to kill him all along. She traveled to Mesa, Arizona. She caused him to lower his inhibitions. And once Travis was vulnerable and naked in the shower, Jody stabbed him, shot him, and left him for dead.
Jody's defense is almost solely based on her testimony. She spends 18 days on the witness stand, displaying a variety of personalities to see if anyone catches sympathy from the jury. But prosecutor Juan Martinez is unrelenting.
The message for Mr. Alexander indicating that you got lost, fun, right?
Yes.
That's not true, right?
That's not true.
She's all over the map, and rightly so.
Okay.
No, I don't
count them. I don't know. I'll just take your word for it.
May 8th, 2013. 4 months and 1.7 million taxpayer dollars later, Jody Arias is found guilty of first-degree murder. But the jury still must decide what sentence best fits the severity of the crime. Shortly after the verdict, Jody tells reporters she's ready to die.
And in a jailhouse interview, she says longevity runs in her family and she does not want to spend the rest of her life rotting away in prison.
After 2 days of deliberations, jurors fail to reach an agreement on Jody's fate.
Because they deadlocked, now they have to have a different penalty phase.
A year later, in February 2015, a new jury convenes to sentence Jody Arias.
This time, they're 11-1 in favor of the death penalty, but the decision must be unanimous. And so at this point, the judge intervenes, steps in, and sentences Jody to life without the possibility of parole.
According to published reports, Arias plans to appeal her conviction, maintaining that she killed Travis Alexander in self-defense.
I think Travis was so enamored and so infatuated that he didn't pay attention to those red flags.
You have a person that has the ability to be what she needs to be at any particular moment. However, if you cross her, she becomes the praying mantis. And after mating with her, she not only bites off your head, but she devours your entire body.
Hollywood, California, Sunday, February 2nd, 2003, 6 p.m. 40-year-old Lana Clarkson works her usual shift hostessing at a live music spot on the Sunset Strip. The B-movie actress is aging in a town obsessed with youth.
Lana Clarkson is very striking, tall, blonde, beautiful.
Lately, acting isn't paying the bills, but working in the members-only foundation room at the iconic House of Blues, Lana stays connected to industry folk. She meets showbiz legends there every night. Around 1:30 a.m. that Sunday night, Clarkson meets a flamboyant, well-known music producer in his 60s, although she doesn't recognize him. Lana escorts the powerful celebrity to his seat. They talk, they laugh, they get along. The star is slurring his words, though, having already consumed several cocktails prior to arriving. Still, he orders a shot of 151 proof rum.
Lana makes sure that he gets down the elevator and down to his awaiting limo.
The famous patron asks Lana to come back to his house for a nightcap.
Initially, she refuses this advance, but he keeps on imploring her, and eventually she is going to, in fact, get in the car and go home.
Chauffeur Adriano D'Souza drives the couple to a huge mansion outside of Hollywood. They arrive sometime around 3 a.m. and spend the next 2 hours talking over a bottle of tequila. 5 a.m.
Adriano D'Souza hears a single gunshot, which is emitted from the mansion. Adriano goes into the location. He looks in the foyer.
What the chauffeur sees shocks him to the core.
There is a chair, which is in the foyer in the center. You can see the blood. And here's Lana Clarkson in it. And she is slumped down in the chair, so he calls 911 immediately.
I think my boss killed somebody. Please, can you send me
Do you think your boss killed somebody?
Yes, yeah.
The call comes from the mansion of music mogul Phil Specter. Authorities respond in force, only to find Clarkson already dead at the scene.
The investigators determined that Lana Clarkson was shot once with a single bullet to the mouth.
Who fired the gun? Was it the chauffeur? Was it Phil Specter? Or could it have been Lana herself?
When the police arrive a short time after 5, what they see is Phil Specter standing in the foyer. He's by the woman. He's got his hands in his pockets.
The officers order him to remove his hands from his pocket. He refuses. A struggle ensues, and the officers ultimately have to tase Mr. Specter.
Coming up, cops investigate Phil Specter. Could the man who created the soundtrack of our lives shoot a beautiful actress in the head? On February 3rd, 2003, cops respond to a shooting at the Alhambra, California mansion of 62-year-old music legend Phil Specter.
Sometime after 5 a.m. in the morning, Adriano, the chauffeur, says Phil steps outside and says, "I think I killed someone."
Police find a gun on the floor next to Lana's body.
The gun was found on the floor near her left leg. However, Lana Clarkson was right-handed.
At the scene, Specter allegedly tells one of the first responders he was the one who fired the gun.
What the Alhambra officer said she heard Phil Specter say was, "I didn't mean to shoot her. It was an accident."
CSI combs through the mansion for forensic evidence. They find a blood-soaked diaper in the powder room off the foyer. Tests confirm the blood is Lana Clarkson's. At 6:09 a.m., less than 90 minutes after Lana Clarkson is fatally shot, Phil Specter is in cuffs, charged with her murder. At the station house, Specter flips his story and denies that he accidentally shot Lana. Instead, he angrily tells cops that Clarkson degrades her and says she had no right to come to his castle and blow her head open. The tantrum falls on deaf ears. Specter's bail is set at $1 million.
He contacts Robert Shapiro, who of course was the attorney for O.J. Simpson. Robert Shapiro bails him out, but not before the police are able to do basically a forensic test kit.
A month later, in March 2003, detectives announce that they don't believe Lana Clarkson took her own life. Specter goes into damage control mode, claiming that he had nothing to do with Clarkson's death.
Phil Specter is going to tell his friends and associates that it's an accidental, that it is not a homicide.
Phil went on to tell his friends that he fully expected to be exonerated.
Specter even takes his story to the media.
During an interview with Esquire magazine, Phil said, "She kissed the gun, and I don't know why."
Did Lana Clarkson actually pull the trigger? In the months following the mysterious February 2003 death of Lana Clarkson, police investigate two divergent theories. One, that the actress shot herself. The other, that Phil Specter murdered her. Specter's supporters have a hard time believing the 5'5" music icon is capable of murder. But the music producer developed a reputation as a control freak, who allegedly brandished firearms to exercise power over others.
Many, many documented cases, many instances where people relayed that in studios that Phil Specter had pulled guns on them.
He was in the studio with the Ramones, and one of them was ready to leave, and Phil pulls out a gun and tells them, "You're not going anywhere."
On another instance, John Lennon was actually chased down the hallway by Phil Specter, who had a gun in his hand that he had just fired previously within the recording studio.
Turns out, Specter's obsession with guns traces back to deep insecurities he developed as a teen.
He was very short, very skinny. According to Phil Specter, when he was younger, he was assaulted in a men's room by 4 hoodlums who beat him up, urinated on him, and because he was not able to take care of himself physically, he then decided he was always going to be armed.
Detectives learned that decades before he met Lana Clarkson, Specter had a gun around another woman, his wife, Ronnie Bennett, lead singer of girl group The Ronettes.
We know from Ronnie that he was alleged to have many, many guns in the home, hidden in many different places within the home.
According to Ronnie, her marriage to Phil Specter was a living hell.
He became so obsessive and so threatening. He often locked her in the closet. He would hide her shoes. He monitored her telephone calls. He even displayed a gold coffin in the basement of the house, telling her that he would kill her and put her on display in this coffin for all to see if she ever left him.
One day, Ronnie decided she'd had enough.
She runs out barefoot and escapes and leaves every worldly possession behind when she does so. So that's pretty desperate.
Ronnie divorced Specter in 1974. That same year, he nearly died in a severe car accident.
He sustains major injuries to his head as a result of being thrown through the windshield, and this is where he becomes a recluse. He starts really getting into medication, into pills, into drinking. In 1991, he suffers an even greater loss, which is the loss of his 9-year-old son who dies of leukemia.
He admitted that he was probably his own worst enemy, probably a little insane, and had devils that fight inside of him.
But Specter's ugly history with drugs, alcohol, and guns, all of which were present the night Lana Clarkson died, doesn't mean he killed her. In September 2003, 7 months after Clarkson's fatal shooting, the coroner finally declares her death a homicide.
The coroner described Lana as someone who he thought was hopeful and did not seem to exhibit any signs of depression, and so he ruled out the possibility of.
Yet there was one controversial finding.
The coroner's report also indicated that there was gun residue on both of Lana Clarkson's hands, which would indicate that she may have fired the handgun.
She could either have the gun or she could have been struggling over a gun. So it's one of the two things, but there was gunshot residue on her hands.
Toxicology reports show that Clarkson was intoxicated when she died. She had a blood alcohol level of 0.12 and therapeutic levels of Vicodin in her system. As for Specter, he wasn't sober either.
Toxicology shows that Phil Specter has Prozac, he has Topamax, which is an anticonvulsant drug, as well as alcohol in his system the night that he's arrested. Phil Specter had been diagnosed as bipolar, so he was always continually experimenting with different types of combinations of medications to see if he could control it.
Detectives theorize that Phil Specter shot Lana Clarkson in a drug and alcohol-fueled rage. The grand jury formally charges Specter with murder on November 20th, 2003.
Phil Specter is indicted. He denounces the DA as Hitler-like, along with his stormtroopers in the DA's office that are coming after him.
I urge a fellow artist, Governor Schwarzenegger, to step in, stop this miscarriage of justice and obstruction of justice.
He's going to set the stage for a battle.
Los Angeles, California, Wednesday, April 25th, 2007. The long-awaited murder trial of Phil Specter gets underway at LA Superior Court.
There's several delays during the course of the Phil Specter trial. There were revolving defense attorneys. At one point, Phil Specter fires Robert Shapiro and hires famed attorney Leslie Abramson, who represented Lyle and Eric Menendez.
The judge allows cameras in the courtroom, so the trial quickly turns into a circus with Specter as the ringleader.
12 years after the O.J. Simpson trial, the media again is insatiable with the notoriety of Phil Specter and the accusation of killing Lana Clarkson. Specter feeds into the frenzy by appearing in court daily with an ever-changing outward appearance.
The case against Phil Specter is mostly circumstantial, but what the prosecution lacks in hard evidence, they make up for in material witnesses.
The main witness for the prosecution in the case was Phil Specter's chauffeur, Adriano D'Souza.
D'Souza is outside. He hears a single gunshot. According to his testimony, Phil Specter comes running out of the mansion. He's got a gun in his hand, says, "I think I killed somebody."
The defense counters, claiming D'Souza's version of events isn't supported by the evidence.
The chauffeur said that Phil Specter exited the residence with a gun in his hand, while photographs clearly show that the gun was found in the residence at the feet of Lana Clarkson.
They go after Adriano de Souza's lack of English skills, and they're saying that perhaps he misinterpreted what Phil Specter had said.
But de Souza says one thing on the stand that's irrefutable.
De Souza testified that on the night of Lana Clarkson's death, Phil Specter was completely drunk.
In addition to the alcohol and medications found in Specter's system on the night of the murder, prosecutors also focus on a pack of Viagra found in a briefcase at the crime scene. 2 of the pills were missing.
The prosecution's position was on the night of Lana Clarkson's death, Phil Specter had popped a couple of Viagra pills, drank some alcohol. Lana Clarkson wanted to leave. He did not want her to go, and thus presented a handgun and shot and killed her, trying to prevent her from leaving.
According to testimony from the medical examiner, Lana suffered bruises on her wrists and forearms, indicating she put up a struggle. Prosecutors argue that Lana Clarkson's murder was not the first time Phil Specter pulled a gun on a woman. They present 5 women from Specter's past who testify that the music mogul had a shocking pattern of violence towards women.
Deborah Robitaille, who was a former employee and girlfriend of Phil Specter, described 2 incidents in the 70s and in the 80s when she tried to leave a party and Phil produced a handgun and began yelling and screaming at her, "I will blow you away. I will shoot you."
Melissa Grosvenor states that Phil Specter put a gun right into her face and told her, in no uncertain terms, that if you try to leave, I'm going to kill you.
Former girlfriend Dorothy Melvin states that a drunken Phil Specter pistol whips her and threatens her with a shotgun.
He told me to take my clothes off and to go up to the 3rd floor.
Take your clothes off?
Yes.
Was he pointing the gun at you when he said this?
Yes, he was.
Stephanie Jennings, who's a photojournalist for the music industry, states that in 1995 she's in a hotel room, that he enters, threatens her with a firearm, which forces her to call 911.
Diane Ogden testifies in 1989, Specter made her undress at gunpoint, attempted to rape her, and threatened to blow her brains out. Specter's lawyers attacked the credibility of the 5 women.
Philip did not shoot this woman, and they can't change that by bringing in tall tales from other girls.
The defense team is going to say that these are nothing more than sycophants, that they were around him when he was famous, when he was powerful, and even after his fame and power dropped off, they came back to him, even after these alleged incidents occurred.
Next, they go after Lana Clarkson, saying she had motive to take her own life.
The defense is saying that she's basically a failed actress, that she's despondent, she can't get anything going, she has financial problems, and therefore these are all the precursors for somebody that is suicidal in nature.
The final battle is over controversial blood evidence.
There was no blood spray found on the wall.
And the theory is that something or somebody, most probably Phil Specter, was blocking that blood from coming out in a certain direction.
Drops of Lana Clarkson's blood was found on the white jacket Phil Specter had been seen wearing earlier that evening.
Using the same evidence, the defense draws the exact opposite conclusion.
They're going to stipulate to the fact that because there was so little blood splatter evidence on Phil Specter, that therefore he couldn't have been standing in front.
Prosecutors can't prove the murder weapon, a .38 Colt Cobra, was in Specter's hands, but they present evidence suggesting he had attempted to clean the gun after it had been fired.
There was blood found smeared on the Colt that was used in the shooting, which would indicate possibly that Phil Specter had tried to wipe off any fingerprints.
It's something that wouldn't happen to us. You wouldn't have that chance. The pistol's simply going to fall to the floor.
On September 10th, 2007, the case goes to the jury. Deliberations take 2 weeks.
The jury comes back 10-2 in favor of conviction, but you need a unanimous jury.
The judge declares a mistrial, but prosecutors say they'll retry the case.
On October 29, 2008, the prosecution begins the second trial in the case of Phil Specter. This time, the defense has a crucial witness in the mother of Lana Clarkson.
But the strategy backfires. Instead of painting her daughter as despondent over her acting career, Donna Clarkson provides testimony that directly refutes the idea that Lana was suicidal.
Lana Clarkson's mom flipped the tables on the defense during her testimony when she spoke of a trip that she had taken with her daughter to purchase new shoes for this job that she had at the House of Blues.
The prosecution, rightly so, said that a person that's suicidal doesn't go out and buy 6 pairs of shoes when you're going to be working at the House of Blues. It doesn't fit, it doesn't jive.
On April 30th, 2009, the jury finds Phil Specter guilty of second-degree murder in the death of Lana Clarkson.
The defendant is sentenced to the term required by law, 15 years to life.
Phil Specter, for his part, shows no visible reaction when the jury's verdict comes back.
Specter gets the maximum allowable sentence. His health has been failing ever since.
Due to polyps that were found on his throat, he can no longer speak.
The man who created the wall of sound now languishes behind a wall of silence.
Just because somebody's been famous, just because they have money, doesn't mean you go with them. And Lana Clarkson had no idea what she was getting into.
Stanford Avenue, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Sunday, September 23, 2001, 12 a.m. 41-year-old nurse Gina Green returns home from a night out with her sister. She tries to go to sleep, but can't completely relax. 3:47 a.m. The security system goes off, startling Green out of bed. She checks all the windows and doors, but nothing seems out of the ordinary. Nearby, cloaked in darkness, a predator watches. Angry, the alarm foiled his plans, but he'll return the following night to execute his sick fantasy.
On September 24, 2001, Gina Green is home alone. Somehow, a man slips into her home and confronts her in the hallway.
She's taken to the bedroom, she's beaten, she's raped, and she's strangled to death.
The following afternoon, after Green fails to show up for work, a coworker stops by. He discovers her lifeless body in the bedroom and calls 911. Homicide detectives arrive on the scene and immediately recognize signs of a violent struggle.
Gina's earrings and shoes are strewn in different rooms, and a clump of hair lies on the floor.
Shorts, a cell phone, and a purse are missing.
Just days after the murder, investigators locate Green's missing cell phone by a warehouse 5 miles from her home.
They were able to recover the purse, the shorts, and the cell phone dumped behind a trash bin.
Unfortunately, none of this evidence leads detectives to any particular suspect, so the case was treated as a one-off murder.
Highway 1, Addis, Louisiana, Monday, January 14th, 2002, 11:50 a.m. Geraldine DeSoto is home alone getting ready to go on a job interview when she hears a knock at the door. The 21-year-old has no idea the man on her front porch is a stalker who's been passing by her house every day, so she lets him in.
When her husband returns home around 7 p.m., he finds her body lying in a pool of blood.
She's been beaten and stabbed multiple times in a very, very violent manner. She's also been stomped. Apparently, there's bloody boot prints that are found there as well.
Investigators find no evidence of sexual assault.
When they look in the palm of her hand, what they're able to see is she's got broken fingernails. Her fist is clenched.
They thought maybe she had used it to fight him off, and they collected her fingernail clippings to determine whether or not the subject's DNA could be found underneath.
Months would pass before law enforcement connects the DNA found under Geraldine DeSoto's fingernails to her killer. Meanwhile, the Baton Rouge Police Department is now dealing with 2 murders within the span of 4 months, and another woman has already been marked for death.
In September 2001, Charlotte Pace lived just 3 doors down from Gina Green. She was so traumatized by Gina's murder that she actually moved to try to get as far away as she could from this scene of the horror.
Charlotte Avenue, Baton Rouge, Friday, May 31st, 2002, 12:30 p.m. Charlotte returns home from the car wash and is eating a sandwich on the couch when there's a knock at the door. The man on the other side seems nice, but he's been studying her for months, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike.
She's attacked, she's raped, she is brutally beaten. Very savage, extremely violent.
Around 2 p.m., Charlotte Pace's roommate comes home and makes the sickening discovery.
Charlotte's nude body is discovered on the floor in her bedroom. Everything's covered in blood. blood spray all over the place. She was stabbed 81 times between screwdrivers and a knife. In addition, her throat has been slashed all the way across, and her skull has been crushed as well.
By the summer of 2002, southern Louisiana is in the midst of yet another killing spree.
There are 60 unsolved murders of women in Baton Rouge since 1985. Because of the recent uptick in rape homicides, investigators form a multi-agency homicide task force. Based on demographics and victimology, the FBI made a determination that the killer would be white. The 25 to 35-year-old male who's physically fit and strong. The task force actually put together a composite sketch showing a white male with a long nose and long face.
When the sketch goes live, tips pour in from all over the region.
A tip comes in from an individual who states that he saw a white pickup truck driven by a white male along I-10 between Baton Rouge and Lafayette. The tipster said it looked like the female passenger was dead.
Law enforcement will remain on the lookout for the white pickup. In the meantime, because they already have the killer's DNA on record, police launch a DNA dragnet.
They tested 1,000 men. All of them were white males. None of them were a match.
Jeffrey Broussard Road, Breaux Bridge, Louisiana, Tuesday, July 9th, 2002, 11:30 a.m. 46-year-old nurse Diane Alexander is home getting ready for work. Her husband, a delivery truck driver, is away on a run. There's a knock at the door. The man outside tells Alexander he's lost and needs directions.
He asks if he can use her phone, but he also asks her if her husband is home. And she says no, she's alone. He instantly turns, he does a 180.
The man forces his way into the mobile home, grabs Diane by the throat, and threatens her with a knife.
He attempts to rape her, but he's unable to sexually perform. Out of frustration and rage, he now takes a telephone cord. Not only does he beat her now, he also strangles her as well.
Diane Alexander is fighting for her life. Then, something unexpected happens.
Diane's son Herman arrives home and the attacker flees. And one thing he's able to say is that he wasn't driving a white pickup truck.
The unidentified vehicle that he saw is a gold vehicle. It has a sticker that says Hampton, and it also has a dent on the front hood. There was a beige telephone cord that was hanging out of the window.
Paramedics rush Alexander to the hospital. She's too badly injured to give police a description of her attacker. But investigators find valuable evidence at the crime scene.
We have DNA transfer onto her dress.
The DNA will take weeks to analyze. Briarwood Place, Baton Rouge, Friday, July 12, 2002, 9:45 p.m. 44-year-old Pamela Kinnemore returns home from a long day working at her antique shop. Her husband won't be back till late. Kinnemore draws a bath and begins to relax. She's completely unaware that she left her house keys in the back door.
At approximately 11:45, Byron Kinnemore arrives at his Baton Rouge home. He's fully expecting to be greeted by his wife, Pamela, and yet when he enters through the door, it's eerily silent.
He looks around the house, but can't find his wife, Pamela.
He walks into the bathroom and he sees a bathtub full of water, but no body. He walks into their bedroom, and here he begins to notice spots of blood. He starts to notice the room itself is slightly disheveled. Something's terribly, terribly wrong.
Cops launch a missing persons investigation. But 4 days later, just west of Baton Rouge, a survey crew finds a badly decomposed, nude body in the water underneath Whiskey Bay Bridge.
The corpse is identified as Pamela Kinnemore. She's been raped. Her throat is slit open. She's been strangled.
A few hundred feet from Pamela's body, the detectives find a beige telephone cord. This is the same telephone cord that was cut from Diane Alexander's home. And the DNA that was recovered from Pamela's body matched the DNA from 3 other murders. So finally, the police are able to confirm that a serial killer was working in Baton Rouge.
But who is this ruthless criminal who killed Gina Green, Geraldine DeSoto, Charlotte Pace, and now Pamela Kinnemore? The answer could lie with Diane Alexander, the only woman to face the killer and live to talk about it.
July 15, 2002. Finally, Diane Alexander is able to give to the detectives a very comprehensive, extremely detailed descriptor of the suspect.
He had neatly trimmed hair, a pencil-thin mustache, and most critically, he was African American.
A composite sketch is generated by law enforcement where Alexander lives. It's a sharp contrast to the FBI profile, which predicted that the suspect is a white male. But it will take several months for the new sketch to make its way into the hands of task force investigators. So for the time being, the attack on Diane Alexander is being treated as an unrelated crime. By the fall of 2002, DNA testing links a single killer to the brutal murders of 4 women in Baton Rouge, Louisiana.
Everybody's in a high state of alert. We have pepper spray being sold, self-defense items being sold, guns are being bought.
Making matters worse, the Special Task Force is not collaborating with the local police department in Zachary, Louisiana, which has been tracking these killings from the beginning.
Although the task force seems to be holding on to the impression that a white male has been committing these serial rapes, the fact is that the Zachary Police Department believed that the same African-American male who committed the crimes against Diane Alexander was actually responsible for all of these rape murders.
For Zachary PD, one name tops the short list of suspects: Derek Todd Lee.
Why? Because he has a history of peeping and breaking and entering in that particular area.
But who exactly is this man Zachary police are convinced is a serial killer on the loose?
He's a big man. He's 6'1", about 210, 220, physically fit, very imposing, and yet that's not the aura which he generates. Nobody comes away with the impression of he's capable of being sadistic or mean or brutally violent.
He had a lot of struggles as he was growing up. He had a very low IQ. He was a loner.
His stepfather, unfortunately, is a very, very harsh disciplinarian, very much centered on Bible studies and corporal punishment.
Lee dropped out of high school and drifted from job to job throughout the 80s.
In 1988, Derek Todd Lee marries Jacqueline Sims, father of 2 kids, provides for them. But on the other hand, he's got a dark side that he's hiding. He's actually doing precursor crimes like peeping and torturing dogs and cats. He's beating his wife, and he violated a protective order. He's not the man he presents himself to be.
In the 90s, Lee spent time in and out of prison for crimes ranging from trespassing to burglary to stalking. With his checkered background, Derek Todd Lee seems like exactly the kind of person who could perpetrate these heinous murders. But the task force continues to rely on the FBI profile, which indicates that the unknown killer is a white male. West Gardner Street, Grand Coteau, Louisiana, Thursday, November 21st, 2002. 23-year-old Trenisha Colum is at St. Charles Borromeo Cemetery, visiting her mother's gravesite.
Afterwards, she returned to her car and was never seen again.
The following morning, Colum's keys, wallet, and ID are found inside her car, which is still in the exact place where she parked it.
Just 2 days later, her body was found by a hunter in a wooded area. She was beaten and raped and murdered. Forensic pathologists took DNA swabs, and they were able to match those DNA swabs with the other recent killings.
Colum is murder victim number 5, connected by DNA to the same killer. Lieutenant David McDavid of the Zachary PD remains convinced the perpetrator is Derek Todd Lee. In Zachary, Louisiana, a suburb 14 miles northeast of Baton Rouge, there were a series of unsolved homicides that McDavid strongly believes were committed by Lee.
August 23rd, 1992, Connie Warner vanishes from her home. 11 days later, her body is discovered in a ditch by a truck driver. April 18th, 1998, 28-year-old Randy Meebier was snatched away from her home. Her body will never be found.
Zachary police questioned Derek Todd Lee in both cases.
There is not enough substantial evidence that link him to any of those incidents, therefore they cannot charge him with any of those crimes.
Lieutenant McDavid fails to convince his fellow officers that Lee killed then and that he's killing now. The lack of cooperation between law enforcement agencies causes the investigation to stall, but the killer is still active, trolling for his next victim. Dodson Avenue, Baton Rouge, Monday, March 3rd, 2003, 4:30 p.m. Carrie Lynn Yoder, a 26-year-old doctoral student at LSU, returns home from running errands.
She calls her boyfriend, just to talk, just to chat, and it's the last time she's ever heard from him.
2 days later, after Carrie fails to answer her phone or return calls, her boyfriend stops by her house.
When he arrives, he finds the back door open.
He walks inside and he sees blood on her purse, which is still there, and he finds some objects that are slightly askew.
The search for Carrie Lynn Yoder will end just 10 days later in a place that's already familiar to homicide detectives.
A commercial fisherman discovers her badly decomposed body only 10 yards from where Pamela Kinnemore's body was discovered in Whiskey Bay. It's the same dumping location.
When the DNA analysis came back, it matched the profile of the other 6 victims.
By the spring of 2003, police in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, have 6 unsolved murder cases involving local women all killed by the same person.
In April 2003, Zachary PD receives a complaint from a woman who's jogging and she feels that she's being stalked. They go to a residence, they look, they find boot prints, they're right by the window, and it's going to be very consistent with an individual standing outside a window who is looking into the window.
They figure that their local peeping Tom, Derek Todd Lee, may be in action again.
Fearing Lee has marked his next victim, the Zachary police chief makes a bold move. Without notifying the task force, he gets a court order to collect a DNA sample from Derek Todd Lee. Highway 61, St. Francisville, Louisiana, Monday, May 5th, 2003. Police visit Lee at his house. They swab his mouth for DNA and immediately send the sample to the state crime lab.
And amazingly, the DNA from Derek Todd Lee matches all 6 murders.
Police move in to make an arrest.
The police did not keep a very tight surveillance on Derek Todd Lee, and when they go to the house to arrest him, he's fled.
The suspected killer of 6 women is now a fugitive.
The FBI now announces we have a nationwide manhunt for Mr. Lee.
On May 26, 2003, Lee calls a woman he knows in Baton Rouge. Investigators are able to trace the call to a phone in Atlanta, Georgia.
The police immediately release the picture of Derek Todd Lee.
2 days later, law enforcement gets a tip that he might be at a local tire shop.
They rush in there, they look to no avail, they don't find him in there. However, one of the members of the fugitive task force had the acumen to look beyond the perimeter they had set up. And who do they see? Derek Todd Lee standing there talking to a woman. Most probably it was going to be his very next victim.
Lee is quickly apprehended. He's immediately transferred back to Baton Rouge and charged with the murders of 6 women. He pleads not guilty to all of the charges. Prior to trial, Lee's defense team presents arguments that their client is not mentally competent to stand trial.
Psychological testing is performed. He's pegged with an IQ of approximately 65.
Even though an IQ that low is often classified as mild mental retardation, a judge finds Lee competent to stand trial.
So he is going to be tried separately for each 6 murders. The first trial, August 5th, 2004, is for the murder of Geraldine DeSoto.
The trial lasts just 5 days and revolves around DNA evidence linking Lee to the crime.
On August 10th, 2004, the jury takes less than 2 hours to secure a conviction.
For the murder of Geraldine DeSoto, Lee gets life in prison. 1 month later, he's back in court, facing first-degree murder charges for the killing of Charlotte Pace. The death penalty is on the table. This time, in addition to DNA, prosecutors have a special weapon, the lone woman to survive one of Derek Todd Lee's alleged attacks.
Diane Alexander will become the voice for all these voiceless women. The prosecution's case is so solid that the defense does not call one single witness.
On October 12, 2004, a jury finds Lee guilty of first-degree murder. He's sentenced to death by lethal injection. Kent, Washington, Sunday, August 15th, 1982, 1 p.m. A fisherman rafting down the Green River spots something odd in the water.
He sees what appears to be a body lodged beneath a rock in the river.
It's a woman, and she's dead.
This is somewhat shocking, but what's even more shocking is he discovers not just one, but 2 bodies.
The bodies belong to 31-year-old Marcia Chapman, who vanished 2 weeks earlier, and 16-year-old Opal Mills, who went missing 3 days prior. Police search the area for clues, unsure if they're investigating accidental drownings or murders.
The river moves and transfers evidence. So you look on the banks of the river, and that's where, amazingly enough, law enforcement officers discovered yet a third body.
Cops identify the third body as 17-year-old Cynthia Hines, who disappeared 4 days earlier. Authorities will soon realize that 3 additional women have been disposed of in the same geographical area.
It appears as though all the women have been strangled to death, and they're all roughly the same age. What they have now is a serial killer on their hands.
One the media dubs the Green River Killer. The Kings County Sheriff's Department forms a Green River Killer Task Force.
Almost immediately, the head of the task force reaches out to the FBI.
The Bureau assigns top profilers John Douglas and Bob Keppel to the case.
When they made the announcement that there was a serial killer loose, they got a flood of tips, overwhelming the small set of resources that they had.
Despite the setbacks, the task force does manage a key breakthrough.
Investigators are able to determine all the women found knew each other. They knew each other from their trade. They were prostitutes working the Seattle SeaTac area.
The killer is targeting prostitutes on a particularly seedy 10-mile stretch of the Pacific Highway between 139th and 272nd Street.
And that becomes ground zero for the investigation.
Cops interview hundreds of women who work the SeaTac Strip.
Basically, they were asking these prostitutes for any Johns that were particularly violent or really stood out to them.
In one particular interview, investigators interviewed a young prostitute who had filed a rape report against one of her clients, claiming that not only was she raped, but he made reference to the Green River murders.
Investigators flood the streets in search of the rapist.
And on August 20th, 1982, they actually make an arrest and publicly announce they have a suspect in custody.
But just days later, the task force goes live with another announcement. The suspect is not their man. The next day, the killer returns to his hunting ground, Pacific Highway, and abducts 16-year-old Terry Milligan. Police won't find her remains for another 20 months. In the summer of 1982, a madman turns the area surrounding Seattle, Washington's airport into a killing field. That September, they encounter 21-year-old Susan Widmark, who tells them a frightening story.
Widmark claims that she was solicited by a John driving a blue and white truck.
He took her to a desolate road and raped her violently at gunpoint. Then he tells her to get redressed as he drives away, and he's talking about the Green River killings. Fearing for her life, she jumped out of the truck while he stopped at a light, and she got a couple of numbers off his license plate.
Widmark is not this John's only victim.
Deborah Estes was a 15-year-old who was walking down the street hitchhiking when a man in a blue and white truck picked her up.
She was driven to a desolate area where she was raped. Afterwards, as they were driving away, he handcuffed her, dropped her off, and had her flee into a wooded area.
Within weeks, police pull over a blue and white truck and arrest a local butcher named Charles Clinton Clark.
Clark is known to frequent the strip and have sex with prostitutes. Authorities show Clark's driver's license photo to the prostitutes who had been raped, and both positively identify Clark as being the individual who had raped them.
Detectives search Clark's truck and residence.
They find the 2 handguns that were used in the commission of the rapes.
Clark actually admitted to raping these 2 victims, but he vehemently denied that he was the Green River Killer.
While Clark is in custody, 19-year-old Mary Meehan vanishes from the strip. Her disappearance is proof that Clark is not the Green River Killer. The real murderer has claimed 3 more victims: 17-year-old Shonda Summers, 23-year-old Denise Bush, and 18-year-old Shirley Sherrill. The task force generates a composite sketch from a witness who saw Sherrill talking to a white male in a pickup truck before she vanished. But the sketch doesn't yield any new suspects.
The investigation hits a dead end.
Seattle, Washington, Sunday, April 17, 1983, 10 p.m. 16-year-old Kimmy Kai Pitzer is out on the streets hooking.
Her pimp sees her get inside a dark pickup truck with a camper shell on the back.
The truck drives away into the night. Kimmy's pimp waits for 7 hours, but she never returns.
Her pimp contacts the police, and he describes to police a man with a pockmarked face.
Cops generate a composite sketch from the pimp's description, but there are no immediate matches. Saturday, April 30th, 1983, 9:30 p.m. 18-year-old Marie Malvar is walking the streets. Her boyfriend, who's also her pimp, is in a car close by keeping watch when a dark-colored pickup approaches.
The boyfriend watches her get into the truck. She appears to get into an argument with the driver, and then suddenly the truck takes off.
Malvar's boyfriend takes off after the truck.
But he loses the guy when he gets stuck at a stoplight. And that's the last time he ever sees Maria Malvar alive.
Immediately, Malvar's boyfriend contacts the police, but there's really not a whole lot they can do at this point.
3 days later, Malvar's boyfriend and family are out looking for her in the same area where she was abducted.
And that's when they see the truck again.
At that point, they follow the truck to a house and they call the police.
Police respond to the home.
They interview the resident. He denies ever knowing Malvar, ever seeing Malvar. Police believe what he has to say.
The owner of the house and truck is a 34-year-old man named Gary Ridgway. By the end of spring 1983, a serial killer has murdered 26 women in Seattle, Washington, disposing of their bodies in remote locations within a 7-mile radius of the Green River.
Even though the largest manhunt in Seattle history is being mounted against the Green River Killer, it doesn't slow the guy down at all.
That May, after 2 young women, Kimmy Pitzer and Marie Malvar, are abducted, police question a 34-year-old truck painter named Gary Ridgway. He denies any involvement, but Ridgway's no stranger to law enforcement. In July 1980, he was arrested for choking a prostitute near SeaTac Airport. Charges filed against him were later dropped.
He gets out of it by claiming that it was self-defense, that she had bitten him and he was just defending himself. Somehow they believed him.
2 years later, Ridgway would have 2 more run-ins with the law. The first charge was soliciting a prostitute, for which he was eventually found guilty. And the second one was soliciting an undercover police officer who was working as a prostitute.
On February 23, 1983, Port of Seattle police stopped Ridgway in his maroon truck north of the airport. 18-year-old prostitute Kelly McGinnis was in the passenger seat. Ridgway told authorities they were on a date and was let go. McGinnis would disappear 4 months later. Her body has never been found. Could Gary Ridgway be the Green River Killer? His pickup truck is identical to the vehicle described in the abduction of 2 women, Marie Malvar and Kimmy Kai Pitzer.
You have this vehicle match, a great piece of evidence, but the task force, they're overwhelmed with data. And at that point, they just weren't able to connect the dots.
By the end of 1983, a staggering 38 women have fallen prey to the Green River Killer. But the unknown murderer has changed his disposal patterns.
Instead of along the Green River, now he's concentrating his dumping ground in and around Star Lake, which is right near SeaTac Airport.
In April 1984, cops discover the remains of 4 women in the same area along Star Lake Road. All 4, 16-year-old Terry Milligan, 18-year-old Alma Smith, 17-year-old Dolores Williams, and 17-year-old Sandra Gabbert, disappeared from areas along Pacific Highway.
When investigators found the skeletal remains, they also moved some brush aside and found a shoe impression. An analysis of the shoe print determines that it's a men's shoe, approximately size 10 or 11. So here we are now, 3 years into this investigation, and we have 1 shoe print so far to go on.
That November, in a bizarre twist, investigators begin consulting with notorious serial murderer Ted Bundy, who's locked away at Rayford Prison in Florida.
Bundy believes that the recent disposal sites are probably closer to where the offender lives. When they mapped out all the areas where they found the bodies, it's basically a rough triangle, and they believed that he may live or work within that triangle.
There is one suspect who lives within the red zone, Gary Ridgway. The same Gary Ridgway cops briefly questioned in the 1983 disappearance of Marie Malvar.
Gary Ridgway is basically raised in the Seattle area. His father was a bus driver, and occasionally he would tell him about what he would call whores who would get on the buses and tell his son to stay away from him.
He had a very strange relationship with his mother. That is, that he was sexually attracted to her at the same time that he hated her.
When he was 16 years of age, he was able to lure a 6-year-old boy into the woods. Once they were secluded together, he took out a knife and stabbed the young man.
He said he just wanted to see what it would be like to kill somebody.
After a brief stint in the Navy, Ridgway married the first of his 3 wives in 1972. But it was during his second marriage, which lasted from 1973 to 1981, where Ridgway started to veer off.
Gary became a Bible-thumping religious convert. He would preach to people, he would read the Bible out loud at home and at work, he would go door to door.
On one hand, you have this fella who's leading this very pious life, but on the other hand, you have this dark side of him where he's doing just the opposite, frequenting prostitutes in the Seattle, Washington area.
Still, Ridgway blends into the middle-class neighborhood where he lives.
He was someone who held down a consistent job, someone who was married, and someone who could be your next-door neighbor.
Seattle, Washington, Monday, May 7, 1984. Investigators strap Gary Ridgway to a lie detector. They ask him just 3 questions, including whether or not he's ever caused the death of a prostitute. Ridgway answers no. The polygraph shows no deception. Ridgway will remain on law enforcement's radar for the next 3 years.
As a result of many interviews, investigators learn that prostitutes have seen this man on many occasions cruising the strip. And what investigators find extremely interesting is that he was absent on every day from his job whenever a prostitute disappeared.
The task force interviews Ridgway's second wife. She tells them that Gary liked to have sex in locations where Green River victims' bodies had been found. Kent, Washington, Wednesday, April 8, 1987. Police seize hundreds of items in a massive search of Gary Ridgway's home, work locker, and vehicles. They also collect a saliva sample from Ridgway and immediately send it to the lab for DNA analysis.
Unfortunately, at the time, the science wasn't that great, and they were not able to tie him by DNA to any of the victims in the Green River killings.
By 1988, the Green River Killer has strangled 41 women to death, and the task force is no closer to bringing him in. In December 1988, after months of investigating truck painter Gary Ridgway without making an arrest, law enforcement finally has a new suspect, 37-year-old pharmacology student William J. Stevens.
A series of tips were called in against Stevens based on the Crime Stopper reports. Stevens was on the run for 8 years after serving 2 years for burglary. Investigators delve into Stevens' past, and he's known to have a very strong contempt for prostitutes and has even talked about murdering them.
Police search Stevens' home.
In it, they find firearms, they find fraudulent credit cards that he's been using under assumed names, and they have found, amazingly enough, photographs of nude prostitutes.
They take him into custody, but the case quickly implodes.
His brother comes in with credit card evidence and travel records, and they prove airtight alibis that Stevens could not be the Green River Killer.
9 years and more than $15 million later, the task force disbands in 1991 without a single viable suspect in custody.
The largest manhunt in U.S. history, and it went nowhere.
The Green River case goes ice cold and remains dormant for 10 years until a new sheriff reopens the investigation in the spring of 2001.
With the advancement of new DNA technology, one of the first things they do is they take all the evidence and they resubmit it to the crime lab for DNA analysis. Among the first samples sent are samples that were recovered from 3 victims that were found between 1982 and 1983.
Authorities compare the samples to saliva collected back in 1987 from original suspect Gary Ridgway.
I was part of the cold case reevaluation of the Green River killings. And on September 10, 2001, the day before 9/11, we got the results from that DNA testing. All 3 samples matched Gary Ridgway.
Renton, Washington, Friday, November 30th, 2001. Cops arrest Gary Ridgway as he's driving home from work.
Ridgway is charged with the murders of Marcia Chapman, Opal Mills, Carol Christensen, and Cynthia Hines.
Law enforcement will spend the next 18 months building a case against Gary Ridgway. In June 2003, Ridgway strikes a deal with prosecutors to take the death penalty off the table.
As part of his plea bargain, he agrees to provide complete details concerning the murders and the location of his victims.
It takes 5 months and multiple interviews for Ridgway to debrief investigators on all of his crimes.
I only killed women that accepted the money.
Detectives get a clear, sick picture of a serial killer's MO.
I thought I was doing you guys a favor. Killing prostitutes here, you guys can't control them, but I can.
He said he chose mainly prostitutes because he hated them.
Ridgway would target a prostitute, usually on Pacific Highway South, and watch her from a distance. Then he'd drive by, sometimes flashing money, and try to pick her up. To reduce suspicion, he'd often show his ID or pull out his wallet to reveal a picture of his son. Once a woman got in his truck, he would take her to his house or a wooded area and have sex with her. Most of the murders took place inside his house or one of his vehicles. He tells investigators that sometimes he took the victim's money, but he always took their jewelry.
Ridgway also admits that he went back to the disposal sites and had sex with some of his dead victims. And he buried them later to prevent him from going back and having sex with them again.
Through the summer and fall of 2003, Ridgway guides detectives around Seattle to several of the locations where he dumped bodies.
To Ridgway, they're throwaways, disposable humanity, and he considers killing these prostitutes as his career.
Seattle, Washington, Wednesday, November 5th, 2003. Gary Ridgway confesses in court to murdering 48 women.
At that time, it's the largest number of confirmed killings by a serial killer in the history of the United States. Gary Ridgway is sentenced to 48 consecutive life terms. In addition, he receives 480 years for tampering with evidence.
In February 2011, Ridgway pleads guilty to a 49th murder after the remains of Becky Marrero, who vanished in December 1982, were discovered. To date, Ridgway maintains that he killed between 75 and 80 women, but law enforcement has been unable to confirm the additional killings.